Warrior lore. Now that something big has happened to my Imperial Thunder sect, Reverend Mi Yu and Quang Tian have fallen into the Sky Patrol City. Everyone is gathered in the Thunder Palace. I'm afraid that all the disciples of the 100 Refinements Hall are here. How can you stay in your cave? This fat middle-stage Jindan stage cultivator was actually the deputy hall master of the Thunder Palace's 100 Refinements Hall, Zhen Xiaoyang. Hall master, you can handle the matters of the 100 Refinements Hall. This old man doesn't have to get involved, lest he thinks too much. Zhen Xiaoyang raised his hand and said, he sees the 100 Refinements Hall as his own. Although I'm his assistant, he'll be alerted if I take an extra glance at him. I have my own important matters to attend to, so who would have the patience to deal with his trivial matters? How can a sparrow know the ambition of a swan? Jinyu said with a smile. Lord Hall Master naturally won't lower himself to his level. However, tens of thousands of disciples have fallen into the hands of the enemy. This matter is still too big. Lord Hall Master has to take a stand. This old man already knew about this when I was in the Great Thunder Palace. Zhen Xiaoyang glanced at Jinyu and said, the news from the Sky Patrol City has already spread for several days. However, the Great Thunder Palace did not dare to release it casually. They only dared to spread the news when they found a scapegoat today. Now, the various halls of the Thunder Palace must have gathered a group of impassioned disciples. There will probably be some young disciples causing trouble and venting their complaints. This is the time for Hall Master Yu to appear as a righteous elder. How can this old man join in the fun? Yes, this disciple understands. Jinyu said with a bitter smile. This disciple still thinks that I should go to the Thunder Palace to show some concern. I was even prepared to force Yu Qian to go to the palace. With Yu Qian's temper, I'm afraid he won't go, right? Zhen Xiaoyang laughed. This disciple of yours is a little strange. He's a little different from his parents. That's right. Yu Qian went to rest by himself. Yun Xiao and the others went. Jinyu smiled and nodded. After listening to Lord Hall Master's opinion, Yu Qian did the right thing. What's right or wrong? Zhen Xiaoyang said with a smile. Whether it's right or wrong, it's up to the Great Thunder Palace to decide. Lord Hall Master means. Jinyu said curiously, this is the reason why Lord Hall Master recruited this disciple? What does Xiao Hua's right or wrong have to do with us? Zhen Xiaoyang shook his head. In this old man's opinion, I hope that Great Thunder Palace will immediately hand down the punishment and kick Xiao Hua out of 10,000 Thunder Valley. When there was only Xiangyang back then, this disciple couldn't even take down 10,000 Thunder Valley. Now that Xiao Hua has been kicked out of 10,000 Thunder Valley, there's still Xiangyang, Cui Hongshan, and even Xiangjili. 10,000 Thunder Valley is becoming stronger day by day. Zhenyu sighed. Let's not talk about Xiao Hua anymore. It's impossible for him to be kicked out of 10,000 Thunder Valley. Zhen Xiaoyang waved his hand. No matter how big his mistake is, there won't be any big punishment this time. It's destined to be all bark and no bite. Because Xiao Hua has brought Qian Qinghua back from Luyang. Jinyu suddenly jumped out of his jade chair. How is this possible? Qian Qinghua is actually still alive? Not only alive, he's living very well. Zhen Xiaoyang sneered. This old man also didn't think that after dozens of years, Qian Qinghua would actually be brought back by Xiao Hua. This Xiao Hua is really mysterious. But with this merit, Lord Sect Master won't heavily punish Xiao Hua. This disciple understands. Jinyu was obviously shocked by the news of Qian Qinghua's return, but then he calmed down. Qian Qinghua should have used the secret soul oblivion technique of our thunder controlling sect, right? Has he woken up yet? Definitely not today, and according to this old man's observation, he was seriously injured that day, and now he has sealed himself for dozens of years, so the soul oblivion technique won't be easy to wake up. It will take at least dozens of days. Zhen Xiaoyang answered, this old man called you here today to give you a message. Now the news of Qian Qinghua's return is only known by people above the sect master, and it hasn't been spread yet. You should think carefully about the thunder-devouring bead, to see if there are any flaws. Then, without waiting for Jinyu to speak, Zhen Xiaoyang looked up at a trace of light outside the cave and smiled bitterly. Thunder-devouring bead. This is an innate item. How could Qin Xinghua, a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator, how could he know such secret information? How could he have obtained the thunder-devouring bead all by himself? If this suspense can't be confirmed, I'm afraid Lord Sect Master won't easily believe the origin of the thunder-devouring bead, right? Don't tell me. He used the thunder-devouring bead to replace the thunder-vanquishing bead? Hearing this, Zhang Yu's face showed a bitter smile again. He bowed and said, I have already reported this matter to Palace Master as early as a few decades ago when senior brother Jinxie had an accident. That year, Disciple received Sect Master's order to find a reliable person to send out the information about the thunder-devouring bead. Disciple thought for a long time and knew that senior brother Jinxie was looking for some information about the Buddhism sect, so I secretly told senior brother Jinxie about the thunder-devouring bead. Disciple thought senior brother Jinxie went back to find the thunder-devouring bead and brought it back to our thunder-controlling sect, but he didn't go there at all, and nobody knew where he went. He didn't even take the news seriously and spread it out casually, which made the disciples of Shanghua sect and Qiqiao sect know. Fortunately, this news fell into Qin Xinghua's ears by accident, and Qin Xinghua left. The best part was that Qin Xinghua didn't come back, but the thunder-devouring bead came back first. Although the sect master had kept this matter under wraps and no one knew who had found the thunder-devouring bead, didn't the palace master make it clear? Other than Xiaohua, who just joined the thunder-controlling sect, and Xiaohua, who went to the Great Thunder Hall before going to the Jade Archive Hall, who else could it be? These things can't be traced. This old man also understands and is also relieved. Zhen Xiaoyang narrowed his eyes. The problem is, what happened to Jinxie? It's said that there was no record of him leaving the sect that year, and at the same time, Qin Mingwei of the Canlei Palace also disappeared. The two of them didn't die together, did they? Disciple also investigated later. Zhen Yu nodded. That Qin Mingwei also seemed to be looking for the Buddhism sect ruins, just like Jinxie. And the two of them didn't have any record of leaving Sky Thunder Peak. So, maybe they had a conflict because of the Buddhism sect ruins. Maybe they died together somewhere in the sect. That's right. Disciple thinks that Jinxie didn't look for the thunder-devouring bead because he found something from the Buddhism sect. Instead, he went somewhere else to look for the Buddhism sect. This Buddhism sect, Disciple really doesn't know why it's so tempting? -11. Chapter 30:14. Then, there must be an exception to our previous speculations. There must be a third party. This third party must have taken their storage pouches, including the items from the ruins of the Buddhist sect, and destroyed their corpses. Zhen Xiaoyang smiled bitterly. Otherwise, how could their corpses have disappeared? And the third party? Can he find the information about the thunder-devouring bead in Jinxie's storage bag? Wouldn't that expose us? That's the most important thing. If Qin Xinghua didn't come back, we wouldn't have to think about it. But now that Qin Xinghua has come back, the sect master will definitely find out the reason for the thunder-devouring bead from Qin Xinghua. Maybe he'll find the place where Jinxie and Qin Mingwei died, or the third party. We'll be so sad. Zhen Yu shook his head again. Sect master, I've said before that even if senior brother Jinxie told me about the thunder-devouring bead, he wouldn't be able to trace it back to me. What's more, the news of the thunder-devouring bead was heard by Qin Xinghua outside the Sky Thunder Peak, so we don't have to worry about it. How could the third party know about us? Speaking of this, Zhen Yu was a little worried. He looked around and whispered, Actually, I've been wondering about it for so many years, but I don't know if I should ask now. Well, just say it. The inhibition of the cave residence was opened after you came in. Zhen Xiaoyang smiled. And now all the people are looking at the 8 Thunder Palaces, so no one will notice this place. Yes. Zhen Yu still hesitated for a moment, saying, The Alliance Master treats us well, so I agree with him from the bottom of my heart. Moreover, he also respects our Imperial Lightning sect and our sect. He doesn't want us to do anything that goes against our wishes. But, since the primordial item in his hand is so important to our thunder-controlling sect, then why can't he exchange it with the thunder-devouring bead for the Buddhist weapon he wants? Haha, I've thought about it before. Zhen Xiaoyang was still smiling. You know, I'm also a disciple of our thunder-controlling sect, and I'm also a lineal disciple of the Thunder Palace. My position in the Thunder Palace is not low, so I don't have any reason to betray our thunder-controlling sect for some petty profit. You don't have to worry about that. And all this time, have I ever asked you to do anything against your will? Yes, it's precisely because I've never done anything against my heart that this disciple is so assured to ask Lord Hall Master. Zhenyu said with a smile. Actually, it's like this. Zhenyu, think about it. What kind of status does Alliance Leader have? He's looking for a Buddhist artifact that can gather lightning. If he says that he's giving it away, I'm afraid it won't sound good, right? Jin Xiaoyang gathered her words and said, even if the sect master doesn't say much, he will still let the Alliance Master take the risk, right? Besides, where is this Buddhist artifact? Even the Alliance Master was only guessing. You've searched several places where lightning gathers in my Sky Thunder Peak, but you couldn't find any clues. If Lord Alliance Head takes out the thunder-devouring bead, what will Lord Sect Head use to exchange? This disciple feels that the possibility of Myriad Thunder Valley is higher. It's a pity that this disciple can't go deep into the Myriad Thunder Valley. It's hard to make a decision. Zhenyu muttered. It's a pity that the Buddhist artifact isn't in the Thousand Thunder Mountain. Zhen Xiaoyang felt a little regretful. And that helpless and stubborn temper of his, there's no way to explain this to him clearly. Zhenyu nodded slightly. Also, we've been searching for that Buddhist artifact in the Sky Thunder Peak for 100 years, right? Lord Alliance Leader can't wait any longer. We can only use the last resort. Otherwise, in the next great war between immortals and demons, Lord Alliance Leader will be very passive. Jin Xiaoyang said in a low voice, and this last resort is naturally the method of putting one's life on the line. If we only discuss it with Lord Sect Head, how would Lord Sect Head agree? See, Zhenyu suddenly woke up and sucked in a breath of cold air. He said hurriedly, could it be? Lord Sect Head has already used the thunder-devouring bead on the Sky Thunder Peak's array? Looks like you can comprehend a lot when you're guarding Thousand Thunder Peak. Jin Xiaoyang sighed. This old man only thought of this after a long time. I didn't expect you to understand it so quickly. This disciple is guarding lightning descent every day. Naturally, I know a little more than Lord Sect Head. Zhenyu coughed and said, that's right. If we look at it now, Lord Sect Head must be using the thunder-devouring bead to replace the thunder-vanquishing bead bit by bit. In other words, between the replacement of the old and new thunder pearls, the Buddhist artifact that gathers lightning to appear. Tell me, this method of taking drastic measures, will Lord Sect Head accept it? Jin Xiaoyang said with a smile. Zhenyu shook his head. Now that heaven and earth's spiritual energy has changed greatly, the heavenly lightning has also mutated. Using the thunder-devouring bead to replace the thunder-vanquishing bead is the way for our Imperial Thunder Sect to survive. If Lord Alliance Leader makes this matter clear, Lord Sect Head might not disagree. You're wrong. Jin Xiaoyang shook his head. First, the great change in heaven and earth's spiritual energy is a recent matter. Lord Alliance Leader didn't know about it beforehand. Although his divine ability is great, he can't know about it after 100 years. Indeed, Zhenyu realized. Second, the thunder-devouring bead came from Lord Alliance Leader. Will Lord Sect Head use it? 100 Refinements Hall is being watched closely by Jinhayu. This old man, as the deputy sect head, is being ostracized by him. Do you think Lord Sect Head, as the sect head of our Imperial Thunder Sect, will tolerate Lord Alliance Leader interfering with the foundation of our Imperial Thunder Sect? But even now, if Lord Alliance Leader has ulterior motives, isn't it the same? It's different. First of all, Lord Sect Head won't have any vigilance in his heart. Secondly, the thunder-devouring bead has already been refined by Lord Sect Head. What is he afraid of? Jin Xiaoyang had clearly thought about it for a long time. In that case, we should be the meritorious officials of the Imperial Thunder Sect now. Jinyu also understood at this time. If not for Lord Alliance Leader's thunder-devouring bead, my Sky Thunder Peak's lightning array would have long lost its effect, and the door would be wide open, right? Hee, that's indeed the case. Jin Xiaoyang laughed. Unfortunately, we can only be nameless meritorious officials. We will never be known by Lord Sect Head, and the group of Imperial Thunder Sect disciples who have received kindness from him. We will never be like that Xiao Hua from the myriad Thunder Valley, whose name will be left in our Imperial Thunder Sect's records. Sigh. This is called man proposes but God disposes. Presumably, Lord Alliance Leader didn't think that there would be so many unforeseen events back then. Zhenyu sighed. Moreover, if back then Disciple had taken down the myriad Thunder Valley and found that Buddhist artifact, we would have offered up this thunder-devouring bead. Ha ha ha. Zhen Xiaoyang laughed loudly. You already said that man proposes but God disposes. Then don't think about it. Today, you still have to think about it carefully and see if there are any flaws in it. Right now, the situation has not been resolved and the sect head has discovered this kind of secret. Although we have a clear conscience and are also thinking for the sect, there is still an alliance leader in the middle. It's better for the sect head to have some suspicions. Yes, Disciple understands. After Zhenyu dispelled his doubts, although he didn't care too much, he also understood the importance of it. He lowered his head again, as if pondering. The entire immortal cave was silent. Far away in the myriad Thunder Valley, Xiaohua never thought that so many things he encountered were actually arranged by others. The matter of him being the fisherman who reaped the benefits could not be hidden from those who were observant. He was still helplessly in the myriad Thunder Valley's immortal cave, narrating his experience. Just as Xiaohua was about to fly into the Gale Snowfield to save Xiao Mao, a scarlet-red messaging talisman emitted an intense lightning light and rushed into the immortal cave, landing in front of Xiao Hua's eyes. Oh? Xiao Hua stared blankly. When he reached out to crush the messaging talisman and looked at the message inside, a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Adoptive father, Xiang Zhili said anxiously. Who came? Ignore him. Quickly tell me, how did you sneak into the spirit stone vein of the Gale Snowfield? There were so many sword cultivators. Boy, I heard that after over 10,000 disciples of Xuanyan School fell into the hands of sword cultivators, you actually saved so many of them. Today's story will end here, Xiaohua said with a smile. The future is long. The past has already become a story. The future story will have to be written with feet. You can't be immersed in the past story every day, right? Adoptive father, Xiang Zhili said somewhat helplessly. Why are you speaking the same way as father? Because we are both elders. Xiaohua smiled faintly and stood up, saying, You'd better prepare your own story. When adoptive father has time, I will also listen to you. Hee, boy knows. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Xiang Zhili was overjoyed. His story was naturally his fortuitous encounter, and he didn't even tell Xiang Yang. Now that he saw Xiaohua's intention, it seemed that he was going to give him pointers on cultivation, so how could he not be happy? Xiaohua's dragonization art was truly admirable, and this dragonization art wasn't the great magical power that Xiaohua had promised him. He was truly filled with anticipation for Xiaohua's pointers. Mistress, Xuanshu is here. Xiaohua stood up and walked towards the cave entrance. You don't need to get up. Oh, this child. Zhuo Minghui smiled benevolently and didn't stand up. Xiang Yang was about to stand up when Yin Qinglian tugged on his sleeve. Only then did he realize and sit down again. Second senior brother, we won't go out. Dui Qiming said, Xuanshu is very familiar with us, and he didn't receive us when he came here earlier. Oh, all right. Xiaohua saw that everyone in Myriad Thunder Valley was avoiding him and nodded helplessly. Xiaohua left the cave, and in a short moment, he saw Xuanshu's figure appear in midair. The two people's gazes met briefly, and they both avoided each other. When they got closer, they saw each other's appearance, which hadn't changed for more than 10 years, and smiled at the same time. This smile was very natural to Xiaohua. Senior sister Xuanshu, I didn't expect you to come today. Xiaohua still used his original form of address and bowed in greeting. Xuanshu didn't stand on ceremony and returned the greeting, saying, I originally wanted to come back in a few days and not join in the excitement here. However, I just received the news, so I naturally had to come today. -11. Chapter 30:15. Xiaohua's heart warmed. This kind of friend who helped him in his hour of need was a true friend. Chui Hongshan's contacts were probably just ordinary wine and meat acquaintances. Are you all right? Sun Shu looked up and down at Xiaohua. Thousands of words seemed to be stuck in his throat, unable to say half a word. After holding it in for a long time, he finally said these few words. However, just these few words, together with the more than 10 years of worry and longing, were poured out. I am very good. Xiaohua smiled. A very comfortable, very unrestrained feeling arose in his heart. 10 years of war. I have benefited a lot. AI, yes, you are very good. I should have known. Sun Shu sighed. You rose to prominence in the Great Dao Sword War. Now, your reputation is like the sun at noon. In my Imperial Thunder sect, apart from Grandmaster Wuming, I'm afraid it's your turn. Every once in a while, the battle reports would be. At this point, Sun Shu's face turned slightly red, and he didn't continue. Xiaohua heard it clearly, so there was no need to say it. Every time Sun Shu paid attention to battle reports, wasn't it because he wanted to know about Xiaohua's news? A kind of indescribable trust arose in Xiaohua's heart. He said with a smile, ashamed. It's all average, all average. All average? Sun Shu was slightly stunned, but then his eyes brightened. He covered his mouth and laughed. I should have thought of it. Back then, you were so powerful before Foundation establishment. Now, you are already middle Foundation establishment. Maybe core condensation is also possible? Xiaohua felt a little proud in his heart. This was also the first time he directly told others about his core formation cultivation. I should have thought of it. This was already the third time Sun Shu said should have. Shui has already advanced to late Foundation establishment. How could you have just advanced to middle Foundation establishment? Sun Shu's words didn't seem to contain jealousy, only a trace of regret and hidden bitterness. Hearing Sun Shu mention Shui, Xiaohua raised his brows and asked, What about Shui? I heard Master's wife say she has been in seclusion? Yes. At the same time, Sun Shu frowned. Somewhat puzzled, he said, This girl has been like a madwoman for more than 10 years. She's been in secluded meditation non-stop. At first, I thought she was afraid she wouldn't be able to catch up. Because of other people's cultivation bases, you would look down on her. But after she entered mid-foundation establishment, she still had to go into secluded meditation. Even Master has repeatedly advised her against it, fearing that she would once again go berserk and her Dao foundation would be unstable. At this point, Sun Shu said helplessly, I did want to go into seclusion, but it was fine at the beginning. But in the end, my heart demons arose. How could I dare to force it? Right now, he had only just stepped into the middle stage of foundation establishment. Compared to Shui, compared to junior brother, he's really much stronger. Senior sister is right, Xiaohua said with a smile. The path of the heavenly Dao is long, and progressing step by step is the right path. When I see Shui, I will ask her more. Seeing that Xiaohua was already a gold core cultivator, yet he still called himself her little brother, Sun Shu smiled sweetly. She looked around and said, Huh? I thought I was already early, but who knew? I was still late. Neither early nor late, it's just right. Xiaohua smiled and raised his hand. Please, senior sister Sun, eldest senior brother, and the others are all waiting in the cave. I won't go in. Sun Shu was even more embarrassed. Seeing that you're fine, I'm relieved. When junior sister Shui comes out of seclusion in a few days, I'll come with her. Xiaohua knew that she was thin-skinned, so he thought for a moment and nodded. That's fine too. Unfortunately, just as he said those two words, several divine senses swept over from afar. After touching Xiaohua, they suddenly retracted. Senior sister Sun, don't go. A few more good friends are coming. Xiaohua smiled and looked into the distance. All right. Sun Shu was naturally also swept by those divine senses, so she simply nodded generously. Not long after, Jin Minghui, Su Qing, Jinhua, Chiu Su and Bai Sugu's figures appeared in midair. The five of them saw Xiaohua from afar, and their faces were filled with ecstasy. Greetings, senior brother Xiao. Jin Minghui and the others landed in midair and bowed respectfully. Ha ha ha, junior brothers, it's really been a long time. Xiaohua was happy in his heart. He knew that this kind of emotion that had been tested by blood and fire was true emotion, so he raised his hand and smiled. Yes, we've all missed senior brother Xiao. Su Qing smiled and said, thinking about the situation in the battle with senior brother back then. We're all incomparably excited. The battle is already over. There's no need to talk about it in the future. Xiaohua pointed at Sun Shu and said, This is Sun Shu from Sunlei Palace. She's my best friend. Greetings, senior sister Sun. Several people bowed and wanted to meet her, so Sun Shu naturally returned the greeting naturally and gracefully. Then, everyone surrounded Xiaohua and entered the cave. Naturally, Cui Hongshan and Dui Qiming didn't wait for them to enter the cave and had already brought a few disciples to the entrance to welcome them. Then, they instructed their disciples to serve spirit fruits and other things. Jin Minghui and the others were more familiar than Sun Shu. Ever since they returned to Jinlei Palace, although they didn't have any contact with Cui Hongshan in terms of the internal affairs of the palace, they still frequently visited. Xiang Yang and Xiang Zhili didn't stand on ceremony and casually sat down after entering the cave. On the contrary, after Sun Shu greeted Zhuo Minghui and the others, she somewhat reservedly sat beside Yin Qinglian. Seeing Zheng Quan and the others tidying up the jade table and preparing the spirit fruits and spirit wine, Zhenhua glanced at Zhen Minghui and gave him a meaningful glance. Thus, Zhen Minghui smiled and said, Senior brother Xiao, actually, when we were in Jinlei Palace earlier, we already received the news that senior brother had returned. At that time, the entire Jinlei Palace was in an uproar. Presumably, junior brother Cui had already rushed back to Myriad Thunder Valley at that time. Little brother also met Zhenhua at that time and was preparing to invite Su Qing and the others to Myriad Thunder Valley together. But thinking about it, senior brother Xiao must be tired after returning from afar, and there will definitely be many masters coming to visit senior brother Xiao. We were thinking of coming back in a few days. Junior brothers, I understand your feelings. Your feelings won't be inferior to your feelings a few days later, Xiaohua said with a smile. However, before I could find Qiu Su, Zhanhua continued, another bolt from the blue came down. I discussed with senior brother Minghui. If others don't come, we will definitely come, and we will definitely be there today. Yes, I know, Xiaohua said with a smile. But, Zhen Minghui said with some indignation, just after we gathered together, we will come to Myriad Thunder Valley. Jinlei Palace has already gathered many low-level Qi refinement disciples. Oh? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows. He had a bad premonition. Most of these disciples are the juniors of the disciples who were trapped in Sky Patrol City. Zhen Minghui said in a low voice, they said, it was all senior brother Zhao's fault that the disciples of Imperial Thunder Sect were trapped in Sky Patrol City. They wanted to find senior brother Xiao to find their master. They wanted senior brother Xiao to give them an explanation. They wanted senior brother Xiao. What do they want me to do? Xiaohua said coldly when he heard Zhang Minghui stop talking at the end. Their words are very unpleasant, Zhenhua said in a low voice. Zhen Minghui looked at Xiaohua's face and said, they wanted senior brother Xiao to take his own life as an apology and to get senior brother Xiao out of Sky Thunder Peak. Ha ha ha, I have seen thousands of sword cultivators. Why would I be afraid of a few Qi refinement disciples? Hearing this, Xiaohua laughed instead. He really didn't expect the low-level disciples to have such a reaction. This was just Great Thunder Palace's trick to divert attention. At that time, he felt that it was fine to be a scapegoat, but he really didn't expect such a strange thing to happen. Damn it, this group of old farts. They really think too much. Xiaohua couldn't help but prostrate himself in admiration of Fairy Xianhua. If Great Thunder Palace hadn't found Xiaohua as a scapegoat and had rashly revealed the matter of tens of thousands of Imperial Thunder Sect disciples falling into Sky Patrol City, then Great Thunder Palace probably wouldn't have been able to withstand the gathering of these young disciples, right? That's right. These were all low-level disciples. When they saw Foundation Establishment and Golden Core cultivators, they had to stand still and respectfully salute, not to mention nascent soul masters. But the problem was, which young person didn't have a trace of courage? Not all young people had the guts. Moreover, this involved their masters. Adding to that the resentment from the great battle of Dao and Sword all these years, they probably really had to vent it all out, right? Now, this Xiao has become their enemy. After laughing loudly, Xiao Hua's mouth was somewhat bitter. Zhenhua and Baisu Valley stayed at Quanjin Mountain for 3 years, which was a blessing in disguise. However, Dui Ling was sent back to Sky Thunder Peak after returning from Quanjin Mountain to Sky Patrol City. It was enough to keep her life, so how could she still hope to build her foundation? And after returning to the sect, Dui Ling still couldn't find the opportunity to build her foundation. As Dui Qiming spoke, she had already stood up. Dui Ling was a disciple of Dui Thunder Palace, so as her former senior sister, she had to welcome her. -11. Chapter 30:16. However, before Dui Qiming could reach the entrance of the abode, Dui Ling had already rushed in. Dui Ling had indeed matured a lot compared to before. 10 years of time had left a deep mark on her face. However, once Dui Ling entered the abode, she immediately looked at Xiao Hua and said anxiously, "Martial Uncle Xiao, you should quickly leave Myriad Thunder Valley. Many disciples of Dui Thunder Palace are at a loss and want to come to Myriad Thunder Valley to find you." Dui Qiming was shocked. Why would they want to come to Myriad Thunder Valley? Dui Ling. Xiao Hua looked at Dui Ling's anxious face and asked faintly, "Ordinary Qi refining disciples are unable to get close to Myriad Thunder Valley. Don't worry. The magic power in your body is in chaos and has already been eroded by the silent thunder of my Myriad Thunder Valley. You should quickly adjust your breathing." Xiao Hua saw a trace of magic power flickering on Dui Ling's anxious face and knew that she had used magic power to resist the silent thunder when she entered the inner valley of Myriad Thunder Valley. However, it was very obvious that although Dui Ling's cultivation was at the 12th layer of the Qi refining realm, she still couldn't completely resist the silent thunder and was injured by it. However, she still took the risk and endured the pain to enter the inner valley in order to report to Xiao Hua. "This concubine." The anxiety on Dui Ling's face faded as she said embarrassedly, "This concubine has received Martial Uncle's great kindness and is unable to repay it. This concubine is afraid of delaying Martial Uncle's important matter." Dui Qiming only came to her senses after hearing this. She hastily took out a yellow talisman from her storage bag and used her magic power to strike it on Dui Ling's body. After a flash of lightning, Dui Ling's pale face gradually regained some color. "Thank you for your hard work, Dui Ling." Xiao Hua looked at Dui Ling gratefully. Although Dui Ling's news had already been sent by Zhen Minghui and the rest, Dui Ling's intentions didn't seem to be inferior to theirs. "Since Martial Uncle knows, this concubine can rest assured." Dui Ling smiled. "Martial Uncle's cultivation is exceedingly high and naturally has a way to deal with it." Xiao Hua shrugged and said unhappily, "I know, but I still haven't thought of any good methods." Dui Ling saw this somewhat familiar action and thought of the 10 years of not seeing her and her own cultivation. Dui Ling was somewhat sad, but she still forced a smile. "Martial Uncle can avoid it. There's no need." "Humph. Why would this Xiao avoid it?" Xiao Hua sneered. "This Xiao wants to see who dares to come to my 10,000 Thunder Valley and ask this Xiao for an explanation." Zhuo Minghui also whispered, "Child, we're not avoiding them. We're just going into seclusion. Let them cause a ruckus outside." "Master's wife." Xiao Hua was too embarrassed to refute Zhuo Minghui, but he still raised his head and said, "This disciple wants to see what these low-level disciples are thinking. I want to see if they're doing this for the Imperial Thunder Sect or for sword cultivators." Although Xiao Hua's words were full of lofty sentiments, apart from Sun Shu, everyone was worried. Facing a low-level disciple of the 8 Great Lightning Palaces, a middle-stage foundation establishment Xiao Hua, they really didn't have any particularly good countermeasures. Of course, Sun Shu understood that at the last step, Xiao Hua only needed to reveal John Doe's identity, and who would dare to be arrogant? Seeing everyone's frown, Sun Shu couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. That's right, Xiao Hua's trust is more precious than anything else. "What should we do?" Dui Qiming and Cui Hongshan smiled bitterly at each other. The two of them knew better than anyone else the severity of this crisis. At the critical moment, another wave of divine sense swept over. Shue shue? This divine sense was very familiar, revealing two different feelings of indifference and passion. Once Xiaohua sensed it, a smile immediately appeared on his face. Always at this critical moment, he always had his loved ones and lovers by his side. Always had their concern and love accompanying his heart, making him unable to feel the coldness of the world. Junior martial sister Shue has come out of seclusion? Sun Shu's face was slightly embarrassed, but at the same time, he was also stunned. Because he had probed Shue Shue a few days ago and knew that the time she would come out of seclusion was uncertain, he naturally didn't check it out again today in a hurry. Shue Shue was indeed already a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. She flew extremely fast, and in a moment after divine sense swept over, she had already arrived outside the cave. Apart from Xiaohua, who came out to welcome her, the others, as usual, didn't come out. Shue Shue. Xiaohua looked at Shue Shue's somewhat thin cheeks and couldn't help but reach out his hand and shout, "Darling Xiao." Shue Shue landed and placed her hand in Xiaohua's hand. That warmth was very familiar to her. "When did you come out of seclusion?" Xiaohua couldn't help but ask. "Sun Shu just arrived and said you've been in closed-door meditation all these years." "Hee. I came out of seclusion 4 hours ago," Shue Shue said with a smile. "I'm afraid I sensed darling Xiao returning to the mountain, so I hurriedly came out of seclusion, right? But I didn't expect senior martial sister Sun to be half a step faster than me. Actually, your cultivation level." Xiaohua still wanted to say something, but Shue Shue squeezed his hand and said, "We'll talk about this later. Today, I came to ask you for a favor." "Oh? What is it?" Xiaohua frowned and asked curiously. "Let's enter the cave first." Shue Shue took Xiaohua's hand and very rarely took the initiative. "I have to report this matter to Martial Uncle Zhua first." Xiaohua originally thought Shue Shue wanted to persuade him to avoid those aura refining disciples, but looking at Shue Shue's expression, it seemed she didn't know about this matter. He followed Shue Shue into the cave. Shue Shue's arrival was naturally different from Sun Shu, Jin Minghui, and the others. Zhuo Minghui also personally came to welcome her. But how could Shue Shue let Zhuo Minghui take a few more steps? She hastily walked in front of Zhuo Minghui and respectfully saluted her. Zhuo Minghui had a smile on her face, and that smile seemed to be sweet. The expression she looked at Shue Shue with was even more benevolent than Yin Qinglian and Dui Qiming. She pulled Shue Shue's hand and insisted that Shue Shue sit next to her. Xiaohua walked behind Shue Shue and was rather puzzled. Previously, before he left Myriad Thunder Valley, Shue Shue also came, but he had never seen Zhuo Minghui so close to Shue Shue. It was as if Shue Shue was her own family. The dual cultivation ceremony hadn't been held yet. Xiaohua really didn't understand. Before Zhuo Minghui gave birth to Wu Qing, although she was very close to the disciples of Myriad Thunder Valley, after all, she didn't have the affection of licking her children. Or, it could be said that she didn't understand the meaning of familial love. Only after she gave birth to Wu Qing did she understand the meaning behind it. Therefore, when she looked at Xiang Yang, Xiaohua, and Cui Hongshan, she didn't think they were any worse than Wu Qing. Love the house, love the crow. When she saw Shue Shue, this wife who hasn't married, her affectionate attitude was innate. "Martial Uncle Zhua, please take a seat first," Shue Shue said with a smile. "After the boy greets the various senior brothers, there is still an important matter to discuss with you." All right." Zhuo Minghui returned to her seat with a beaming smile, while Shue Shue greeted Xiang Yang and the others. When she saw Sun Shu, Shue Shue smiled and said, "Senior sister is even faster than junior sister." Sun Shu couldn't understand the meaning behind Shue Shue's words, so she said with a smile, "Senior sister saw you a few days ago and knew that you hadn't come out of seclusion. Today, Xiaohua came back and encountered some trouble, so I hurried over. I didn't know that junior sister had come out of seclusion." Junior sister's mind suddenly became restless today. "I felt that there was something important, so I had no choice but to come out of seclusion." Shue Shue didn't say much, frowning as she said, "As soon as I came out of seclusion, I actually heard that Xiaohua had returned to the mountain from Zun Thunder Palace, so I hurried over." When Sun Shu heard this, she felt a bit sad. She understood that Shui was hinting that she had a telepathic connection with Xiao Hua. Although she didn't say anything else, her meaning was clear. However, when Shui saw the sadness in Sun Shu's eyes, she immediately understood that she was thinking too much. She knew that Sun Shu was very sensitive right now. She wanted to say a few more words, but she was afraid of adding to the trouble, so she simply didn't say anything more. She pulled Sun Shu's hand and sat beside her. In fact, Sun Shu's mood was very awkward, but now that Shui was accompanying her again, her heart slowly relaxed. However, she heard Zhuo Minghui speak again. Shui, you're already in the late stage of foundation establishment. Don't be in a hurry to cultivate in seclusion. Golden core cultivators can't become golden core cultivators just by cultivating in seclusion. Now that the great battle of Dao and Sword is about to end, you still have to go out with Xiao Hua and gain experience. Disciple will engrave martial uncle's words in her heart, Shui said with a smile. Disciple's aptitude is dull, and my starting point is also low. If I don't diligently study and cultivate in seclusion, how can I catch up with someone? Of course, Disciple's master also told Disciple clearly that the late stage of foundation establishment needs more tempering, and that there won't be any more progress in seclusion. Disciple also told Master that after this seclusion, I won't force myself to cultivate in seclusion again. Very good. Xiaohua smiled. In other words, after coming out of seclusion this time, you don't need to cultivate in seclusion again. Xiaohua is wrong. Facing so many disciples, Shui didn't hide her feelings for Xiaohua. She said with a smile, I came out of seclusion this time because I had a warning in my heart, so I had no choice but to come out. After this matter is over, I'm afraid I'll have to cultivate in seclusion for a few more days. Oh? Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and asked curiously, what kind of warning did you have? Shui saw Xiaohua's concern and smiled sweetly. However, she stood up and said to Zhuo Minghui, Martial Uncle Zhuo, Disciple wants to borrow Xiaohua for a few days. I wonder if Martial Uncle can agree? Zhuo Minghui was stunned, but she immediately understood. She clapped her hands and said, Shui, you can borrow him. Don't return him. Martial Uncle is joking. Shui blushed and said, Xiaohua is now the pillar of our myriad Thunder Valley. It won't do if he doesn't come back. The word "our" made the entire Immortal's cave feel warm. However, Xiaohua frowned and said indifferently, Shui, what's going on? If you don't tell me clearly, I won't leave the valley. Oh? Xiaohua, what's wrong? Shui was a bit dazed, as if she didn't understand Xiaohua's attitude. She said curiously, my body and mind had a warning sign. I felt that there was danger in Misty Mountain, so I had no choice but to come out of seclusion. It was only when I went to Thundercloud Palace to ask for leave that I received the news that Xiaohua had returned to the mountain. That's why I happily came to find Xiaohua. I know that with Xiaohua accompanying me back to Misty Mountain, uncle, brother, and the others will be fine. Shui took out her leave token. -11. Chapter 30:17. So it's like that. Xiaohua suddenly understood that this was a coincidence. He naturally wouldn't check Shui's identity tablet. He turned to Zhuo Minghui and said, if that's the case, Master's wife, I'm afraid I really have to go with Shui. Okay, then. Hongshan, go to Thunder Palace and ask for leave on behalf of your senior brother. Zhuo Minghui nodded and instructed Cui Hongshan. Yes, I'll go right away. Cui Hongshan hurriedly got up. No need. Shui smiled. No need to trouble junior brother Cui. I'll go with Xiaolang to Thunder Palace. After I ask for leave, I'll immediately leave the mountain with him. This? Cui Hongshan smiled bitterly. Senior sister Shui, you don't know. Senior brother can't leave Myriad Thunder Valley now. Huh? Why? Shui was very surprised and puzzled. The details should be explained by eldest senior brother. Cui Hongshan naturally wouldn't waste time and said, I'll go to Thunder Palace first. Oh, okay. Shui turned to face the sun with Xiaohua on her back, but she whispered a few words to Sun Shu and winked at her. Sun Shu was obviously stunned, but she returned to normal in an instant. When Cui Hongshan walked to the entrance of the cave, Sun Shu frowned and whispered, Junior sister Shui, Master is going to preach Tao at Jingxin Pavilion the day after tomorrow. It's fine if you don't come out of closed-door meditation, but since you've come out, shouldn't you go? You didn't ask for leave from Master, right? Oh, you're right. Shue seemed to be caught off guard. She said in a low voice, little sister originally wanted to see Master after taking leave from Xuanlei Palace, but when I heard the news of Xiao Lang returning to the mountain, I was thinking, hee, I forgot about Master. How about this? I'll send a summoning talisman. No, summoning talismans are too disrespectful. Since you're in a hurry, I'll go for you. Since Xiao Hua will accompany you, Master will be relieved. Sun Shu stood up and said to Xiao Hua, Junior sister Xue is here now. Senior brother Jin and the others are also here. I's not much, I's not. So I won't stay here any longer. What happened here was a group of aura-refining disciples being deceived and blinded by their hot-bloodedness. Junior martial brother Xiao, you don't have to lower yourself to their level. Hee, I understand. Xiao Hua stood up to send him off. He understood that if Sun Shu came with Shue, Sun Shu would definitely not leave. However, if Sun Shu came alone and Shue came, then Sun Shu would definitely leave. Thus, he did not urge him to stay. Thus, after Sun Shu took his leave, he followed Cui Hongshan out of the myriad Thunder Valley. Xiao Lang, what's going on? Shue asked in confusion. It's like this. Xiang Yang wouldn't let Xiao Hua speak, so he roughly explained the situation. Oh, I see. Shue came to a sudden realization and nodded. No wonder some aura-refining disciples gathered in Xuanlei Palace. Each and every one of them looked so agitated. I thought something big had happened. Then, she looked at Xiao Hua and said, Xiao Lang, everyone has a time when they are young. Senior martial sister Sun is right. They were all hot-blooded and thought that their actions could help the Imperial Thunder Sect. However, they didn't know that they were doing something extremely wrong. When the truth came out, they were extremely regretful. We are now Foundation Establishment Masters. We really can't lower ourselves to their level. I understand. Seeing Shue being so meticulous and persuasive, Xiao Hua's somewhat cold heart gradually melted. He nodded and said, previously, Master's wife advised me to leave for a period of time. Now, it's all good. I can go on a trip in your place. It's really the best of both worlds. Hee, that's right. Shue pursed her lips and smiled. It seems you still have to thank me. Seeing that Shue's arrival had untangled the knot in everyone's heart, Zhen Minghui and the others also calmed down, especially Dui Ling. After regulating his breath for a long time, he finally returned to normal and looked at Shue thoughtfully. You all go to the outer valley and take a look. Dui Qiming saw that there were some changes in the situation and felt uneasy, so he instructed Jin Tingmu and the others. Yes, disciple will go right away. Zhen Tingmu hurriedly agreed. You all go too. Xiang Yang turned his head and instructed Zhenquan and the others. When the dozen or so people had just walked out of the cave, Dui Ling anxiously said, You all be careful. Those disciples look aggressive. I'm afraid they won't be easy to deal with. You go too. Xiao Hua turned his head and said to Xiang Zhili, If you see anyone you don't like, feel free to attack. As long as you don't lose your life, Foster Father will take care of everything. Yes. Xiang Zhili's voice was extremely loud and clear. He jumped out from behind Xiao Hua and flew out of the cave, completely ignoring Xiang Yang's fierce glare. In fact, ever since they entered the cave, Xiang Zhili had been staying behind Xiao Hua. When he heard everyone's messages, he was eager to give it a try. If he hadn't seen Xiang Yang signal him not to move, he would have already gone out with Zhenquan and the others. Now that he had received Xiao Hua's instructions, how could he restrain himself? Not to mention Xiang Yang. Even Yin Qinglian didn't understand why Xiao Hua was so arrogant. The current Xiao Hua was completely different from before he fought the sword cultivators of Huan Nation. They couldn't imagine that Xiao Hua, who had gone through the great battle of Dao and Sword, had a new understanding of life and death. Xiao Hua wasn't afraid of the ferocious sword cultivators and the swordsmen who could destroy the heavens with one sword. How could these qi refinement cultivators, who still smelled of their mother's milk, enter his eyes? On the contrary, Jin Minghui and the others had already seen Xiao Hua's high profile and weren't surprised at all. That's right. Xiao Hua spoke again. Tidy up the things in the cave abodes in the outer valley. Don't let some dishonest disciples steal them. Io, that's right. Hearing this, Dui Qiming was a little anxious and hurriedly transmitted her voice to Jin Quan and the others. Cui Hongshan and Dui Qiming had put in a lot of effort in the cave abodes in the outer valley. Those were the face of Myriad Thunder Valley. If it was really as Dui Ling said, those disciples would really vent their anger on those cave abodes if they were enraged. Dui Qiming hurriedly went out again. She was naturally worried about those disciples and could only do it herself. Fortunately, not long after, Dui Qiming leisurely returned. It was obvious that she had already tidied up the cave abodes. During this time, Xiao Hua listened to Xue Xue talk about what had happened in the past 10 years. In fact, it was very simple. Xue Xue had been cultivating in seclusion for the past 10 years. It seemed that in the days when Xiao Hua wasn't around, Xue Xue could only use seclusion to pass the time. Thinking about what Fairy Hong Xia had said before, that there would be an indescribable pressure when she was by his side. Xiao Hua's heart ached and he looked at Xue Xue with love. Xue Xue was naturally full of tenderness. She smiled and her eyes never left Xiao Hua. Xue Xue. After Dui Qiming returned, Zhuo Minghui asked, that year, when you were helpless about Martial Uncle's seclusion, you said that he would definitely condense his core. At that time, I still had some doubts. However, at that time, I also had the idea of going into seclusion. However, because of Wu Qing, I was afraid that my vitality would be damaged and it would be impossible for me to pass the test of condensing my core. However, after hearing your words, I had confidence in condensing my core. The result was as you said, I successfully condensed my core. But now, your helpless martial uncle has been in seclusion for so many years. Hee, martial uncle Zhuo, you can rest assured. Xue Xue smiled and said with certainty, Junior can guarantee 10,000 times that martial uncle will definitely succeed in condensing his core, just like Junior knows that I will definitely be able to enter the late stage of foundation establishment. Xiao Hua was extremely surprised. He had seen a lot of divine techniques and clairvoyant techniques. Even his own karma hand didn't seem to have this kind of magical ability. He really didn't know how Xue Xue could predict this. Xue Xue, how do you know this? Darling Xiao, this is a feeling. It's a pure feeling. Xue Xue smiled and said, it's the same as when I know that there will be a disaster in Fog Mountain. Moreover, I also know that Martial Uncle will definitely come out of seclusion this year. Ah, really? Zhuo Minghui's face showed ecstasy. That's right. If she only said that Wu Qing could condense his core, that would be a guess. Xue Xue actually said when he would come out of seclusion. So what else did she have to worry about? Oh, Xiao Hua was speechless. This answer seemed to be similar to Zhu Xia's. If Xiao Hua didn't know Zhu Xia, he would still be suspicious. However, after knowing Zhu Xia and seeing the Shaman King's divine technique, he actually believed Xue Xue's words. Moreover, Xue Xue seemed to have this kind of magical ability after awakening the Lightning Beast's bloodline. Perhaps the Lightning Beast's bloodline originally had this kind of magical ability? Master. Just as Zhuo Minghui's heart calmed down, two panicked voices came from outside the cave. Dui Qiming's two female disciples, Zhang Wan and Fan Yuming, hurriedly rushed in and shouted, outside Myriad Thunder Valley. There are over 1,000 aura refining disciples flying over, blocking the sky, blocking everything. Humph. Xiao Hua sneered. He swept out his divine sense and took a quick glance. It really was as Zhang Wan had said. There were over 1,000 aura refining disciples aggressively rushing to the entrance of Myriad Thunder Valley. However, because of the silent thunder, they didn't dare to get too close. They stood in midair and arrogantly shouted something. Among them, there were quite a few instigators who were egging them on. Jin Quan and the others stood guard at the edge of the silent thunder, not getting close. They looked a bit flustered. On the other hand, Xiang Zhili looked at these disciples with interest, seemingly thinking about something. Xiao Hua, who was used to facing thousands of sword cultivators, felt bored by this formation. He only used his divine perception to take a look and then withdrew it. He said indifferently, the disciples nowadays are really amazing. They actually dare to attack the cave of a Foundation establishment master. Actually, most of them are disciples who don't know the truth, Zhang Minghui said with a wry smile. They only want to understand the truth, only want to cover up the shame of the Imperial Thunder Sect. They themselves are the shame of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Xiao Hua said without any trace of politeness. If they have the ability, then go to Sky Patrol City and fight it out with the sword cultivators. -11. Chapter 30:18. Also, perhaps it's because they have always worshipped Martial Uncle Xiao, but they never expected that Martial Uncle Xiao would become the greatest sinner of our Imperial Thunder Sect. Their idols collapsed in an instant. No one would be able to bear this responsibility. Dui Ling continued. There's also this. Xiao Hua was speechless. He never thought that his name would have such an effect in the Imperial Thunder Sect. Of course. Dui Ling laughed. Disciple thought so back then. After returning, I talked a lot about Martial Uncle with the disciples of Converted Thunder Palace. As long as Disciple talked about how Martial Uncle killed thousands of sword cultivators, the eyes of all the female disciples of Converted Thunder Palace would light up. Nonsense. When did I kill thousands of sword cultivators? Xiao Hua finally understood what it meant to spread a false rumor. Kiki, no matter what, they just love to hear it. Dui Ling shrugged his shoulders like Xiao Hua. If Disciple didn't say so much, they wouldn't be happy. Just now, when Disciple heard Martial Uncle's punishment order in Converted Thunder Palace, Disciple also felt extremely sad. Dui Ling explained. However, Disciple understands Martial Uncle. Anyone who has survived the great battle of Dao and Sword would definitely inform the conference hall immediately if they encountered any news related to the battle. However, these so-called hot-blooded disciples don't know that. They have been quietly cultivating every night after hearing about your wonderful deeds. They believe that you have always been right. Now that you have suddenly made such a big mistake, their hearts can't take it anymore. Why isn't junior brother Cui back yet? Is it so difficult to apply for leave? Xiao Hua frowned slightly. Faced with Dui Ling's situation where even he himself didn't know who was wrong, Xiao Hua could only face it and escape. Without waiting for Dui Qiming to speak, Shui laughed. Now that Shocking Thunder Palace is in a mess, it won't be easy to apply for leave, right? Wait a little longer. Master, there are more and more people outside. Zhang Wan, who had just returned, flew over to report. It seems like it's not just Shocking Thunder Palace disciples. There are disciples from other Thunder Palaces as well. There are even quite a few female disciples. Just wait and see. Dui Qiming was now relieved. My myriad Thunder Valley has silent thunder. If they want to die, come over. It's not my myriad Thunder Valley's doing. Yes, I understand. Zhang Wan nodded, but she was still slightly hesitant as she said, eldest senior brother seems to be at odds with those Qi refinement disciples. Zhen Quan. Xiao Hua was taken aback. He unconsciously released his divine sense, but when he saw Xiang Zhili, who was facing off against several 10th-layer aura refining disciples, Xiao Hua smiled. Of course, wasn't Xiang Zhili the eldest martial brother of these disciples? Don't be afraid, as long as no one dies. Your martial uncle will take care of everything. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Yes, I understand. Xiao Hua's words immediately filled Zhang Wan with confidence. Her face flushed red as she flew out with a smile. Second junior brother, Xiang Yang said worriedly, don't provoke everyone, right? These aura-refining disciples are all children. They don't know anything, so this Xiao will teach them a lesson on behalf of their family's adults. Xiao Hua said indifferently, my 10,000 Thunder Valley will be a place that no one can touch in the future. Coming to the myriad Thunder Valley to cause trouble when you don't have the ability, you must be tired of living. All right. Regarding Xiao Hua's strength, as the eldest martial brother, Xiang Yang was also helpless. He had long been aware of the gap between him and Xiao Hua, so he could only agree while secretly glancing at Zhuo Minghui. At this time, only Zhuo Minghui could persuade Xiao Hua. Unfortunately, Zhuo Minghui didn't say anything. In the dozens and hundreds of years she had spent in the myriad Thunder Valley, she had also been ridiculed and ridiculed. Now that Xiao Hua was here to wash away her shame, she could only clap her hands and cheer, right? After all, even if there was any punishment, could it be worse than the previous situation in the myriad Thunder Valley? After about an hour, more and more disciples gathered in the myriad Thunder Valley. There were even many disciples from other Thunder Palaces who had received the news and rushed over in groups, as if there was a gathering point. The atmosphere in the outer valley of the myriad Thunder Valley was also becoming more and more agitated. But at this time, whether it was the Hall Masters of the 8 Great Thunder Palaces or the Great Thunder Hall of the Thunder Immortal Peak, there was no news at all. This silence seemed to be a kind of tacit consent. The thousands of low-level disciples became increasingly arrogant. Previously, they were still whispering and whispering to each other, but now they had already started shouting. There were even some disciples who couldn't help but curse at Xiang Zhili. The atmosphere was like a fireball talisman that was about to ignite. With just a trace of magic power, the entire fireball would explode. Rumble. A faint sound of thunder came from afar. A foundation establishment cultivator's divine sense swept over. All of a sudden, the thousands of disciples became somewhat quiet. However, when Cui Hongshan flew over everyone's heads and completely ignored them, these disciples immediately became restless. This is the junior martial brother of Xiao Hua of the Myriad Thunder Valley. His name is Cui Hongshan. Several disciples who were very familiar with the Myriad Thunder Valley shouted loudly, "Just now, he left the Myriad Thunder Valley in a hurry. Where did Martial Uncle Cui go?" Fortunately, at this time, these disciples still knew to call a foundation establishment cultivator as Martial Uncle, so they weren't blinded by reason. "I'm afraid he went to the shocking Thunder Palace to get reinforcements." Some disciples guessed one after another. Even if he went to the Great Thunder Palace, so what? A few disciples who were obviously not from the shocking Thunder Palace said coldly, "Xiao Hua made such a big mistake and actually let tens of thousands of disciples fall into the Sky Patrol City. I don't even know how many disciples can return after the battle." Previously, in the first stage, although our Imperial Thunder sect suffered a lot of losses, it was still acceptable to have the battle merits of fighting to kill the disciples. Now that all the disciples have been captured, what battle merits can there be? Our Imperial Thunder sect's face has been completely lost by that guy. How can we face the disciples of other sects in the future? That's right, thinking about this, I don't even dare to go to the country of Shi to gain experience. It's really shameless. Sure, no matter what, Xiao Hua is still our martial uncle. Don't be like this. Unfortunately, before this person finished speaking, the person next to him said coldly, "If you think of him as your martial uncle, why are you still here? Our Imperial Thunder sect has too many people like you who bow down to him." When they see a foundation establishment cultivator, they all respectfully salute him. This is why our Imperial Thunder sect is deteriorating. Today, we must make him give us an explanation, and only then can our Imperial Thunder sect rise again. Martial Uncle Cui just returned from the Thunderquake Palace. At this moment, several Thunder Note talismans were sent over from afar. After several disciples received them, their faces were filled with rage. He asked for leave from that bastard Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua doesn't dare to face us low-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect. He chose to escape. Boom, all of a sudden, the entire scene was ignited like a fireball talisman. The suppressed passion of all the disciples suddenly exploded. "Let's go. Charge into the Myriad Thunder Valley. We must interrogate Xiao Hua. Over there." A shifty-eyed disciple pointed to a cave in the distance and shouted, "The Myriad Thunder Valley actually set up a cave here. They obviously spent their Thunderous Palace's spirit stones." The Thunderous Palace's spirit stones are our Imperial Thunder sect's spirit stones, all of which were painstakingly dug out by us disciples from the spirit stone mine. They actually squandered it again. "Let's go. We'll smash this cave. Let's go, let's go." Several disciples shouted without thinking and really rushed towards that cave. Who dares? Xiang Zhili was also anxious. He knew how difficult it was for the Myriad Thunder Valley to set up this cave. Not only was it extremely difficult to obtain the Thunderous Palace's approval, But they also racked their brains to set up this cave. It could be said that this was the myriad Thunder Valley's painstaking effort. You dare block us? A mere 9th-level chi refining brat. Could it be that you want to die? A group of 10th-level chi refining disciples arrogantly shouted. This young master will show you the power of a 9th-level chi refining cultivator. Xiang Zhili's eyes flashed with a cold light, the magic power in his body surging. He took Xiao Hua's words seriously. He wanted to test his skills on these ignorant disciples. Eldest senior brother. Not far away, Jin Quan and the others all shouted. They didn't know Xiang Zhili's cultivation level, and even if he was at the peak of the 12th level, facing so many chi refining disciples, it would still be difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. How could they dare let Xiang Zhili fight with others? Beat them to death. Beat them to death? A voice came from an unknown place. It actually called out such a sinister slogan. Huff, huff, huff. Just when the battle was about to break out, a sudden gust of wind blew through the air, lifting up the robes of all the disciples. Rumble. A faint, muffled sound of thunder came from above everyone's heads. Ah? All the disciples were stunned. They couldn't help but look up, only to see dark clouds covering the sky. Those dark clouds were like rolling waves of snow in the sea, directly pressing down on them. An indescribably terrifying aura came from those dark clouds. Moreover, unbeknownst to them, the streaks of lightning in the dark clouds had surrounded them like snakes. These streaks of lightning swam wantonly in the air for several miles, and every single one of them contained a powerful brilliance. All of the disciples were disciples of the Imperial Lightning sect, so they were familiar with lightning. However, being enveloped by lightning in such a large area made them tremble in fear. Moreover, the sky was clear within a few miles. It was obvious that these lightning bolts were targeted at them. Humph! A cold snort, like a needle, sounded in the ears of thousands of disciples at the same time. Ah! In a burst of wailing and howling, the hundreds of disciples who rushed to the Immortal's cave clutched their heads and fell from the sky, rolling on the foothills. The dozen or so chi refining disciples who were shouting in the crowd just now also fell. Even the few disciples who just shouted, "Beat them to death," were pale. They fell from the sky without any consciousness. A group of children who were still wet behind the ears. Xiao Hua slowly flew over from the distance, followed by Xue Xue, but Xiao Hua coldly said, "You haven't even cultivated your pressure, yet you dare to show off in front of this old man. This old man wasn't afraid when facing thousands of swordsmen. Why would I be afraid of you?" -11. Chapter 30:19. As he spoke, Xiao Hua released his pressure. That pressure was as turbulent as ocean waves and as sharp as a mountain rock. Once these aura-refining disciples came in contact with the pressure, they immediately trembled like a sieve, their waists involuntarily bending. That was because in Xiao Hua's pressure, apart from the pressure of an ordinary foundation establishment cultivator, there was actually a kind of bloodthirsty aura, causing these disciples to instinctively tremble from the bottom of their hearts. You dare. Several aura-refining disciples who hadn't been affected by the pressure were alarmed, urgently saying, "As a foundation establishment master, you actually dare to make a move against us aura-refining disciples. Our masters are determined to." Without waiting for them to finish, Xiao Hua's pressure came over and controlled them all in an instant. Xiao Hua still said coldly, "If you were swordsmen, I would have already killed you. Don't think that just because you have several thousand people, you dare to come. The number of sword cultivators who died in my hands is at least 1,000, if not 800. Didn't this old man still crush all of you to death like ants? As for your masters, don't worry. I will issue a challenge in front of you. As long as you want to stand up for you, as long as you are below the core formation stage, I will accept all of your challenges on the Thunder Arena. Whoever is not afraid of death and dares to come to the Thunder Arena, inform me at any time. I ask my Thunder-Shocking Palace's Taoist Master Lei Ming to be the witness. As for you, humph." Following Xiao Hua's cold snort, a bolt of heavenly lightning as thick as a child's arm fell from the sky, hitting a protruding place on the foothills. Under the lingering lightning, in the midst of a huge sound, This several hundred feet big mountain rock was actually smashed into powder. A burst of smoke and dust rose, unexpectedly covering half the sky. Seeing that all of you don't know the truth and were bewitched by others, and that you're my juniors, I'll spare all of you this once. Xiaohua slowly withdrew his pressure. If you dare to be so bold again, don't blame me for challenging your masters on the Thunder Arena. Humph. At this point, Xiaohua's lightning drawing technique presumably attracted the attention of some cultivators hiding in the surroundings. A dozen divine senses swept over from afar. Xiaohua coldly snorted and immediately used the soul-piercing technique. All the divine senses retracted as if they were bitten by a poisonous snake, hiding in the surroundings. Seeing so many aura-refining disciples causing trouble, you still didn't come out to stop them. With one glance, I can tell you have ulterior motives. Don't blame this Xiao for being impolite. Xiaohua raised his voice and shouted. Immediately after, Xiaohua ignored the thousands of disciples, stretched out his hand and grabbed Shue's hand. Lightning flickered around his body as he flew towards the Qianglei mountain. The dark clouds in the sky slowly dispersed as Xiaohua disappeared. It seemed like they were sending Xiaohua off. Too arrogant. A few li away, two late-stage foundation-building cultivators shouted in exasperation. That bastard Xiaohua not only attacked aura-refining disciples, he even wants to attack us. Let's go. We must unite with the other senior and junior brothers. This time, we can't let the myriad Thunder Valley off. Another cultivator pulled on the cultivator's robe, and the two of them soared into the sky. However, the several thousand aura-refining disciples that they had high hopes for didn't have their lofty aspirations. Each and every one of them struggled to get up in the air. They still looked terrified as they stared at the spot where Xiaohua and Shue disappeared. The arrogance and indignation in their eyes from before had long disappeared. After witnessing Xiaohua's absolute strength, and after experiencing the bloodiness of Xiaohua's oppressive might, everyone's hearts were truly filled with fear. They all looked at each other. They really couldn't understand how they had been so bold before, actually believing that the phrase, "the law cannot punish the majority," was really useful, and actually really came to attack the myriad Thunder Valley. In fact, sometimes, people's nature was really somewhat cheap. If Xiaohua really treated these juniors according to common sense, they might have taken the initiative to climb all over him. However, Xiaohua suddenly pulled down his face, and even directly said that he wanted to compete with their masters on the lightning field. On the contrary, they were scared. The disciples of the various lightning palace hastily went to help the disciples who were injured by Xiaohua's soul stab. Some even went down to check whether those pale-faced disciples were still breathing or not. The majority of the Lightning Palace disciples seemed to have already lost their courage. Of course, this didn't include some disciples who were really bold. Unfortunately, they didn't have the cover of the majority of the disciples, and also didn't dare to really linger around the entrance of the myriad Thunder Valley. After waiting for more than an hour, just as Xiaohua had expected, enormous Thunder Palace's imperial guards came over to inquire about the situation. Only then did these several thousand aura-refining disciples take advantage of the situation and gradually disperse. Only Jinquan and the other myriad Thunder Valley disciples were left behind, their eyes filled with disdain as they watched these disciples leave. Cui Hongshan and Dui Qiming flew out of the myriad Thunder Valley, discussing something with the enormous Thunder Palace's imperial guards. As for Xiang Zhili, he followed Wuqing, who flew over afterwards. His eyes were looking at the thunderclouds in the sky that hadn't completely dissipated yet, and his eyes emitted a fanatical radiance. Hearing Wuqing, his tone was still indifferent, but he asked rather urgently, "This is second senior brother's lightning drawing technique?" Hee. Xiang Zhili laughed. Other than him, who else could it be? Second senior brother seems to be even more powerful than mother. Wuqing seemed to be talking to himself. I remember when you were young, you once boasted that second senior brother had promised you a great divine ability? Xiang Zhili was clearly stunned. He looked at Wuqing with some disbelief, shaking his head in denial. Little martial uncle is speaking nonsense. When did I tell you this? Xiang Zhili naturally didn't remember when he had boasted about this to Wuqing. However, Xiang Zhili wasn't old to begin with, and with the support of Xiao Hua's dragon transformation art, his cultivation was much stronger than his peers. However, he remembered Xiang Yang's teachings and Xiao Hua's teachings, so he didn't reveal his true cultivation to his peers. This wasn't easy for a young person. If Xiang Zhili had really boasted about it in front of Wuqing, it would be normal. Presumably, Xiang Zhili also didn't expect that the young Wuqing would remember his unintentional boasting so clearly, right? Hee. Wuqing didn't pursue the matter, continuing to talk to himself. If it were me, how could I not want this divine ability to control lightning in the 9 heavens? After saying this, he didn't wait for Xiang Zhili to deny anything, and flew towards Zhuo Minghui, who was standing in midair in the valley. Sigh. Wuqing's words pierced Xiang Zhili's heart. Looking at Wuqing's back, Xiang Zhili rubbed his nose and smiled bitterly. How old is he? Isn't he too smart? Sometimes, being too smart and seeing too clearly isn't necessarily a good thing. Then, he scratched his head and said to himself, when did I mention the great divine ability that foster father promised to me? However, when it comes to great divine abilities, isn't this lightning attracting technique the best? With that thought, Xiang Zhili's left and right hands clawed blindly in the air, but not a single cloud moved. Only then did he clap his hands and leisurely fly back to 10,000 Thunder Valley. He understood that from today onwards, even foundation-building cultivators wouldn't dare to provoke 10,000 Thunder Valley. However, Zhuo Minghui, who was holding Wuqing in the distance, didn't think so. Her eyes were somewhat melancholy, and she was also muttering in her heart. She didn't know whether Wuqing would be able to come out of closed-door meditation this year like Shui said. Now, she didn't care whether Wuqing had condensed his gold core or not. She only wanted Wuqing to come out and oversee 10,000 Thunder Valley. She was afraid that Xiao Hua would really cause trouble again. After all, being able to attack thousands of aura-refining disciples already exceeded her original estimation of Xiao Hua. It's really an unfair victory. After Xiao Hua gave his leave of absence to the disciple on duty on Sky Thunder Peak for inspection, he ignored the strange gaze of the disciple on duty and flew out of Sky Thunder Peak. He said to Shui with a somewhat embarrassed smile, "They're just some aura-refining kids. Your husband actually got so angry. No matter what Lord Husband does." I agree. Xiao Hua flew in the air and hugged one of Xiao Hua's arms with her hand. She pressed her face against his arm and said in a low voice, "Moreover, these disciples went too far. They actually dared to challenge the authority of a foundation-building cultivator. If we don't teach them a lesson, I'm afraid they'll cause a lot of trouble in the future." Thinking back, when your husband saw a foundation-building cultivator, he was so scared that he didn't even dare to fart. But seeing that Shui didn't object, Xiao Hua sighed with emotion and said, "Could it be that the way of the world has changed? They're self-proclaimed disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect, and they're low-level disciples. They also have a lot of people. Although you're a foundation-building cultivator, it's impossible for you to control thousands of people at the same time." Shui said with a smile, "That's why they became so bold. This was also the idea of their master behind them. However, they didn't expect. Your cultivation is really frightening. You actually used the lightning-attracting technique to control several li of space. That pressure was released without any hesitation. That's thousands of people. Even I don't have such a great ability." "Forget it. Let's not talk about it." Xiao Hua waved his hand and said, beating the children to draw out the adults. "Your husband wants to see if there's really someone who dares to go up to the Thunder Arena to challenge me." "What? Lord Husband? Are you going to kill people to establish your authority?" Shui raised her eyebrows and asked. "Who knows?" Xiao Hua wasn't afraid at all and said with a smile, "If there's someone who's not afraid of death and wants to cooperate with your husband will naturally have to satisfy their request. Your husband has always been tireless in teaching people." "Lord Husband is tireless in destroying people." Shui smiled and continued, "No matter what Lord Husband does, I will agree. Even if I have to follow Lord Husband to wander the Dawn Rain continent." How is that possible?" Xiao Hua laughed loudly. "Even if the sect master comes out of seclusion, Even if Fairy Xian Hua and the other 7 palace masters are incompetent, it's impossible for them to expel your husband from the sect. Hee, that's right. Lord Husband is a meritorious official in the war. It's reasonable to punish you, but if you're expelled from the sect, then my Imperial Thunder sect will definitely be beyond redemption. Shue said with a sweet smile. At this point, Xiaohua said somewhat embarrassedly, Shue, actually, when we were in the Myriad Thunder Valley, Master's wife had already told your husband about going to the Xuanlei Palace to propose marriage. Your husband felt that, with the merit of the Dao sword battle, there shouldn't be any problems. But who knew that such a thing would happen? As a result, I'm afraid there will be some twists and turns. Your husband can only wrong you. Let's talk about it again after this period of time. -11. Chapter 30-20. Oh. Shue asked curiously, didn't my husband say that he would first propose marriage to big sister Hongxia from Huanhua sect? Hee, aren't you happy that I let you have the advantage first? Xiaohua asked with a smile. Do you want to decline? Unfortunately, Shue said seriously, husband, you're wrong. I'm more than happy. Why would I think of declining? It's just that you met big sister Hongxia first, and met me later. If I snatch this first place, big sister Hongxia will be unhappy in the future. I don't want to make things difficult for my husband. Xiaohua was moved. He held Shue's hand and said with a smile, there's no hurry. Let's talk about it after the battle. If possible, I will propose marriage to both of you at the same time. Hee, thank you, my husband. Shue smiled and kissed Xiaohua's cheek. She urged her magic power to rush out of Xiaohua's arm and shouted, husband, let me see your cultivation. Can you catch up to my late-stage foundation establishment cultivation? Ha ha ha, Xiaohua laughed. Not to mention that you're just late-stage foundation establishment. Even if you're late-stage gold core, I can still catch you. With that, Xiaohua's body flashed with lightning, and he was about to chase after Shue. But suddenly, his heart moved, and he hurriedly shouted, Shue, wait a moment. Oh, what's wrong? Shue stopped in the distance and said with a smile, could it be that my husband can't catch up to me and wants to act shamelessly? No, I remember. There's still a small matter to do. Wait a moment. After saying this, Xiaohua didn't explain further and flew towards Sky Thunder Peak. However, after flying a few meters, his figure had already disappeared. Even if Shue scanned the area with her divine sense, she wouldn't be able to find any trace of him. What is Xiaohua doing? Shue frowned. In no more than an hour, Xiaohua once again mysteriously appeared beside Shue. Even though Shue's cultivation was already at the late stage of foundation establishment, Xiaohua's figure appeared within several zhang of her. She simply didn't sense any omen. Shue's heart jumped, and she said with a smile, Xiaohua, this hour isn't short. Could it be that you're doing something sneaky? TSK, do I need to do that? With an outstanding beauty like you as my wife, this husband doesn't have to think about home. As Xiaohua spoke, he hugged Shue. Haha, wishful thinking. Shue smiled and flew out. She did not ask where Xiaohua went and flew towards the Misty Mountain again. Shue was different from Fairy Hongxia. She did not care about Xiaohua's actions. She only liked to stay by Xiaohua's side and be a happy little bird. Shue, and Shue. Of course, no one knew that the next day, Deity Ling, who had yet to reach Foundation Establishment in converting Thunder Palace, had suddenly reached Foundation Establishment last night. There were no signs of this happening at all, because she didn't know how to answer. She couldn't possibly report that a short, fat, and extremely wretched nascent soul stage master knocked her out, and when she woke up, she was greeted by a black, indiscernible thing that hit her head. At that time, her mind was in a complete mess, and her beautiful life was about to end at this moment. But at this moment, the true chi that hadn't reacted for a long time suddenly began to condense together with an indescribable fluctuation. Is this explanation acceptable? Fortunately, Deity Ling's master knew that Deity Ling had broken his heart in order to reach Foundation Establishment. Now that he had suddenly succeeded, his wish of many years had been fulfilled, so he did not pursue the matter. Although her master did not pursue the matter, Dui Ling's heart was not at ease. She really did not understand how she could have encountered such a strange situation. Until one day in the future, she suddenly realized. The gratitude in her heart was like a shooting star that streaked across the silent sky. More than a day later, clouds and mist emerged from the mountains in the distance. It was extremely fluttering, as if an immortal mountain had fallen into the mortal world. Xiaohua understood that the misty mountain he had visited several decades ago was right in front of him. At this moment, Shui acted as if she had just left Sky Thunder Peak. She hugged Xiaohua's arm and leaned on his shoulder intimately. Her face was overflowing with a smile, and she looked extremely happy. Seeing that the misty mountain was close, Shui did not have any intention of leaving Xiaohua's side. Her behavior was completely different from when she had arrived at her hometown. However, Shui moved her lips to Xiaohua's ear and whispered, "Xiaohua, this concubine still wants to apologize to you." "Oh? What did you do wrong?" Xiaohua's earlobe itched. He turned to look at Shui and asked with a smile that was not a smile. "Actually," Shui twisted her waist and said coquettishly, "this concubine is also doing it for your own good. Hee. Is it because there is no danger in the Misty Mountain?" Xiaohua smiled and reached out to touch Shui's forehead. "Although you were in a hurry, there was not the slightest bit of anxiety on your face. Did you think that your husband did not think about anything?" "Hee. I knew that I could not hide it from Xiaohua." Shui giggled and said, "When this concubine came out of seclusion, I heard that Xiaohua had returned to the mountain. Moreover, I also heard that Great Thunder Palace had issued a punishment order. This concubine was anxious, so how could I think about anything else? I directly flew to the Myriad Thunder Valley. However, on the way there, I thought that with Xiaohua's temper, he would definitely not avoid it. Moreover, Xiaohua is a kind person, so I was afraid that he would be bullied in the Myriad Thunder Valley. Therefore, this concubine thought of this method. And, actually, early on in the Myriad Thunder Valley, Sun Shu left with Cui Hongshan. Moreover, Cui Hongshan took so long to return and even gave you a jade slip of your master. This concubine already had doubts in my heart." Xiaohua smiled and said, "However, since this is my wife's concern, how could this husband not enjoy it? Hee. Actually, in the end, when I saw my husband's thunderous methods, it was completely different from when I left the Imperial Thunder Sect and went to Sky Patrol City. This concubine felt that I was somewhat superfluous." Shui still smiled and said, "My husband controlled the entire situation, and the thousands of disciples were nothing but chickens and pottery dogs. Even with my husband's words, even the late-stage Foundation establishment cultivators would not dare to challenge you. The crisis in the Myriad Thunder Valley was easily resolved by my husband." However, Shui looked at the Misty Mountain again and said, "This concubine hasn't returned home for dozens of years, so it's not bad to come back and take a look. This concubine's superfluous act is fine as long as my husband doesn't blame me." I won't. Xiaohua smiled and said, "This husband also happens to want to give you a surprise. Since I came to the Misty Mountain, that's also a coincidence." "Oh? What surprise?" Shui's mouth let out a surprised smile, but her face was again looking at the Misty Mountain. In a place where Xiaohua's gaze could not reach, a trace of sadness flowed out from her eyes. "Haha, let's talk about it after we meet Ling Zhengyi." Xiaohua obviously did not notice Shui's expression and said with a smile. However, after saying that, he became embarrassed again and said in a low voice, "My wife, how should this husband address him? Just call him fellow Taoist Ling." Shui recomposed her smile and said, "After all, we haven't held the dual cultivation ceremony yet. It's not appropriate to change it now." This husband knows," Xiaohua said with a bit of guilt. "It's all this husband's fault for making you wait for a few more years. Listen to what my husband said. A few years is just a seclusion, a blink of an eye. As long as my husband is by my side, not to mention a few years, even if it's tens of thousands of years, this concubine will still be happy." Shui said without hesitation, "Good. This husband and wife's promise is a promise. Xiaohua actually cutely stretched out his little finger and hooked it with Xue Xue. Ah. Xue Xue really did not expect Xiaohua to have such a childish heart and was momentarily unable to react. After hooking her finger with Xiaohua with a smile, the smile on Xue Xue's face was so sweet that it was about to overflow with honey. Soon after, she brought Xiaohua to the Misty Mountain and sent out the summoning talisman. Then, she pulled her hand out of Xiaohua's arm and slightly pulled away from him, waiting for Ling Jingyi to open the restriction of the Misty Mountain. Who would have thought that this wait would actually take the time of half an incense stick? Seeing the dense fog floating in the foothills like a mystery, Xue Xue's heart gave birth to a bad feeling. Xue Xue, it seems that last time when we followed eldest senior brother to the Misty Mountain, the summoning talisman did not respond for a long time, right? Xiaohua released his divine sense, looked at the restriction of the Misty Mountain, and narrowed his eyes as he asked. Xue Xue slightly bit her lips and said, "It was shorter than that. That summoning talisman did not delay anything. Otherwise, this concubine would have sensed it." Perhaps fellow Taoist Ling went to the Flying Phoenix Mountain? Xiaohua probed. Even if he went to the Flying Phoenix Mountain, Feiyun should be at the Misty Mountain. Xue Xue's face showed anxiety. "I'm afraid that something happened at the Misty Mountain." "Did Ling Feiyun not enter a cultivation sect?" Xiaohua asked again. "Uncle is afraid that if he entered the Shanghua sect, he would be restrained by the Shanghua sect and be unable to inherit the Misty Mountain and Flying Phoenix Mountain's inheritance." Xue Xue explained. Previously, when there was only the Misty Mountain, Uncle had the idea of letting him enter another sect, but if he took the Flying Phoenix Mountain, forget it, darling Xiao. Can you break the formation? Xiaohua nodded. This husband just used his divine sense to check. Breaking the formation is easy, but it will be difficult to rearrange it. Of course, if you have this formation jade slip, this husband will not need to break the formation by force. Do it, Xue Xue said with a bitter smile. This concubine is already a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. How could I have the formation jade slip of the Misty Mountain? Ah, I didn't expect. My wife, you also have the ability to make your words come true. Xiaohua sighed with emotion. This concubine really said it casually. Xue Xue urged, "Hurry up." "Okay, please wait a moment, my wife." As Xiaohua spoke, he flew into the sky. Light flickered around his body. As he waved his hands, red clouds once again gathered above the Misty Mountain. The lightning drawing technique that Xue Xue had seen in the 10,000 Lightning Valley was once again displayed. Layers of thick clouds pressed down on the sky, and streaks of lightning swam like dragons and snakes. As Xiaohua's hands fell, ka-cha-cha, sounds of thunder fell like thousands of giant pythons baring their fangs and brandishing their claws, pouncing down and covering the entire Misty Mountain. -11. Chapter 30:21. Rumble. The entire Misty Mountain shook. The dense fog that never dispersed all year round melted under the lightning, gradually revealing its true appearance. Darling Xiao is really too powerful. Xue Xue sighed in her heart. I've been in seclusion for more than 10 years and finally reached the late stage of foundation establishment. But looking at this situation, the distance between us is getting further and further. I really don't know when I'll be able to catch up to darling Xiao. Rumble. The lightning that filled the sky bombarded Misty Mountain for the time it took to drink a cup of tea. Then, Xiaohua lightly shouted, "Open." Xue Xue saw a lightning bolt as thick as the mouth of a bowl carrying a flash. It was like a huge dragon as it pounced towards a place in the forbidden area. Then, a sound like boiling water was emitted from that place. "Let's go." Xiaohua waved his hand and his figure fell into the forbidden area. Xue Xue didn't dare to be negligent and followed closely behind. She saw that a crack had been torn open in the fog that was as thin as paper. After rushing into Misty Mountain, Xiaohua and Xue Xue landed on top of the 1,000 steps. When they saw the situation on top of the steps, their expressions couldn't help but change greatly. They saw that the 1,000 steps were stained with blood. Hundreds of Misty Mountain's disciples were lying on top of the steps in a disorderly manner. One after another, the sounds of groaning could be heard. Along with these groaning sounds, All of the disciples were curled up and convulsing in pain. When they looked at the top of the steps, they saw a monster that was about 2 zhang tall. It looked like a human, but not a human, like an ape, but not an ape. It was looking up at the flashing lightning in the sky. Between its 2 thick hands, one was holding a middle-stage foundation establishment cultivator whose Taoist robe was already damaged. That cultivator's body was stained with blood. It was the Misty Mountains clan head, Ling Jingyi. The other hand was holding the neck of an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator whose face was completely red. It was Ling Feiyun. Ling Feiyun was restrained by this monster. His legs struggled with all his strength. His 2 hands were also holding onto the monster's big hairy hands. He wanted to move these big hands away, but Ling Feiyun was as powerless as a baby. Xiaohua and Shue's sudden appearance caught the monster off guard. Its scarlet eyes moved away from the lightning in the sky and swept over Xiaohua and Shui. Unwittingly, it opened its bloody mouth and let out an extremely loud roar. A scarlet-red pillar of fire shot out from its mouth and rushed in front of the 2 people. The pillar of fire seemed to be very powerful. Before it even got close, an extremely hot wave of air surged over. Along with this wave of air, there was even an indescribable restrictive force that appeared within a few dozen feet of the 2 of them. Fire ape? Xiaohua stared blankly for a moment, then he seemed to have understood something. He slapped his forehead with his hand. Wang, a faint rumbling sound could be heard. A faint golden hand appeared from Xiaohua's hand and grabbed at the monster. The hand of a nascent soul? Shui was right beside Xiaohua. A wave of boundless mana fluctuations emanated from Xiaohua, causing her to once again feel an incomparable feeling. Seeing this legendary innate technique, she couldn't help but moan. She had an estimation of Xiaohua's cultivation base, but she didn't expect that Xiaohua's cultivation base would still far exceed her expectations. Of course, Shui also knew that Xiaohua's cultivation hadn't reached the point of perfection. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to sense Xiaohua's unfathomable spiritual power. However, seeing Xiaohua's nascent soul hand display, the fierce pillar of fire was immediately extinguished. Moreover, a trace of fear appeared in the monster's eyes. However, this fear only lasted for a moment. Then, the monster swung its hand, and Ling Jingyi and Ling Feiyun immediately fell on the stairs. The 2 people's protective light had already been shattered. Following 2 heavy sounds of impact, blood seeped out of their noses and mouths. Blood also flowed out of their bodies as they rolled down the stairs. Shui clenched her teeth and flew down. She landed on the stairs and helped the 2 people up. After examining them, she found that they were only injured and their lives weren't in danger. Only then did she feel relieved. Looking at the monster again, it casually tossed the 2 people aside. Its body flashed with strong sparks as it waved its hands in front of its chest. It opened its mouth and roared a few times. A strong pillar of fire flew out again. Moreover, behind the pillar of fire, there was another bead the size of a bowl. It flashed with bright red flames and rushed into the sky. The monster was under the control of Xiaohua's nascent soul hand. Its previous waving was just a struggle. When the bead rushed out, a few dozen feet of space around it was filled with thumb-sized flames. These flames directly broke the shackles of the nascent soul hand. Moreover, the bead of fire was like a meteor piercing through the sky. Although it didn't hit the nascent soul hand already showed signs of blurring. Interesting. Xiaohua's eyes flashed with a fierce light. The golden core in his dantian surged, and the nascent soul hand flashed with a strong brilliance. Buzz. Compared to before, 40% of the strength was released again. The sound of wind was loud in the several dozen feet of space. The flame of the bead of fire shrank at the same time with a whoosh. Not only that, but Xiaohua pointed to the left and right. Kacha! Several bolts of lightning fell from the shackles just now. They hit the bowl-sized bead of fire. The strength that could shatter a cliff of several thousand feet knocked the bead of fire down several feet. The bright red brilliance inside was immediately annihilated. At the same time, the flames in the several dozen feet area were also extinguished. Ew! The monster loudly wailed. It opened its mouth, and the bead of fire suddenly returned. At the same time, a fiery red cloud appeared under its feet. Its figure wanted to escape towards the back of Misty Mountain. Can you still escape at this time? Xiaohua's nascent soul hand was somewhat sluggish. However, at this time, it had already fallen. Although the bead of fire resisted, the area around the monster was already covered. The monster only flew a few feet. When the nascent soul hand fell, it just happened to grab the bead of fire. Eowwo! Seeing the bead of fire being snatched away, the monster's fleeing figure was forced to stop. It roared and rushed towards the nascent soul hand that had already retreated to Xiaohua's side. I'll let you know this Xiao's strength. Xiaohua saw the bead of fire fall into his hand. He clapped his hand and took out the wishful staff. The monster gnashed its teeth and clenched its fists. It actually wanted to fight with Xiaohua. However, when the wishful staff fell, the monster immediately sensed that something was wrong. Eowwo! Its roar was full of pain. As Xiaohua's staff struck the monster's body again and again, the flames on the monster's body gradually extinguished. A little bit of blood began to appear. Eowwo! After a dozen strikes, the monster no longer dared to resist. It arched its body and curled up into a ball. It rolled on the steps and its wails shook the mountains. Xiao! Shue's voice sounded. Don't harm its life. This monster seems to be related to the fire ape. Although it is fierce to my Misty Mountain disciples, it has never harmed a disciple's life. It should be interrogating the whereabouts of the fire ape. Xiaohua listened and put away the wishful staff. Sure enough, the monster rolled on the stairs for a moment before obediently getting up. It carefully bent its waist and placed its hands on the ground. It looked at Xiaohua with its crimson eyes filled with grievance and fear as it cried out, "Whoa!" Seeing that the monster was very tactful and was far less unruly than the fire ape, Xiaohua felt pity for it. He looked back at Ling Jingyi and the others who were already healing. He clapped his hand and pulled out the storage bag from his waist. With a wave of his hand, the fire ape with the sun and moon crown on its head flew out of the storage bag. The fire ape was really brave. Seeing that Xiaohua was in front of it, it immediately roared and rushed towards Xiaohua. Xiaohua was not polite. He waved the wishful staff in his hand again. The staff hit the fire ape's head and rolled like the monster just now. However, through the arm, the fire ape's eyes were still fierce. Roar, roar! A surprised cry was emitted from the mouth of the monster by the side. When the fire ape heard this, it was extremely stunned as it turned its head around. When it saw the monster, a trace of confusion flashed across its ferocious eyes. However, it quickly came to a realization. Since it suddenly understood, the fire ape's body trembled a few times. A rare fear appeared in its eyes. Hiss, hiss, hiss. The monster seemed to be scolding it, but it also seemed to be interrogating it. The fire ape obediently stood up and responded a few times. Then, the monster raised its finger and pointed to the left. Only then did the fire ape understand. It hurriedly raised its head and looked around. Roar, roar. Xiaohua saw this and stood coldly to the side. He put away the wishful staff and waited for the monster to break down. Eowwo! The fire ape roared a few times. Although its eyes were still unruly, it no longer resisted and stood obediently beside the monster. However, it seemed that it did not dare to be on the same level as the monster. It opened up a distance and took a step back. Refusing a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit, Xiaohua sneered. He waved his hand and the universe in the sleeve covered the fire ape. Without waiting for the fire ape to struggle, he put it into the spirit storage pouch. "Oh!" The monster hurriedly shouted and pointed at the fire pearl floating near Xiaohua. Unfortunately, Xiaohua did not pay attention to it and waved his hand to put the monster away. The monster hesitated for a moment, but in the end, it did not dare to struggle and was put into the spirit storage pouch by Xiaohua. Seeing that the fire ape and the monster were put away, Xiaohua pointed his finger again and the fire pearl fell into his hand. If one looked carefully, one could see that the fire pearl was like a stream flowing from time to time. When it flowed, the illusions of mountains, rivers, and waterfalls flashed one after another. After these illusions were broken, they all turned into the image of a huge ape. This ape should be the monster that looked like a human but not a human, and this fire pearl should be the monster core of that monster. Although this ape was as ferocious as the fire ape and its appearance was similar, Xiaohua felt that it was a little strange. As for what was strange, Xiaohua did not know. Just when Xiaohua wanted to take a closer look, Ling Jingyi and Ling Feiyun, accompanied Xue, flew over. Xiaohua put the fire pearl into the space. Fellow Taoist Xiao, although Ling Jingyi was extremely respectful and called him a peer, he had obviously been reminded by Xue. Ling Feiyun bowed and said happily, "Senior brother Xiao, you are really too amazing. This little brother admires you so much that I can only prostrate myself in admiration." -11. Chapter 30:22. It's nothing. Xiaohua waved his hand humbly. I was just lucky to have a technique that could subdue this monster. What you used just now, was it the hand of a nascent soul? Ling Jingyi couldn't help but ask. Xiaohua shook his head. I'm not a nascent soul cultivator. How could I use the hand of a nascent soul cultivator? It's just a technique that's similar to the hand of a nascent soul cultivator. Xue curled her lips and looked at Xiaohua reproachfully. Ling Jingyi might not know, but Xue was very clear. In the past, Sun Ming had inadvertently told Xue about the techniques of nascent soul cultivators. The hand of a nascent soul cultivator was one of the techniques commonly used by nascent soul cultivators. Normally, nascent soul cultivators would use this technique to conceal their techniques. But since Xiaohua didn't admit it, Xue wouldn't point it out. That monster was extremely powerful. Father and I weren't its match, but you subdued it in an instant. Ling Feiyun asked again, Senior brother, compared to a few decades ago. TSK, you're many times stronger now. Although Ling Feiyun didn't ask about Xiaohua's cultivation level, his words were full of curiosity. Xue said, Junior brother Xiao went through the baptism of the Dao sword battle. It's normal for his cultivation level to improve greatly. Otherwise, where would his achievements come from? That's right. At the mention of the Dao sword battle, Ling Feiyun's eyes lit up again. He said anxiously, Senior brother Xiao, tell me, how did you kill Qin Jian? That's a swordsman comparable to a late golden core cultivator. Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said helplessly, Feiyun, it's not that I don't want to answer you. It's just that in order to answer this question, I've worn my lips thin. I don't even know how many times I've said the same thing. Please spare your elder brother. You'd better tell me about this fiery, ape-like monster. Yes. I understand. I won't ask any more questions. Ling Feiyun was actually very familiar with how Xiaohua and Li Zongbao killed Qin Jian, but seeing Xiaohua with his own eyes, he couldn't help but ask. Ling Jingyi thought for a moment and said with a bitter smile, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Xiao. This monster suddenly appeared from the ancestral shrine an hour ago. I don't know how it broke through the restrictions of my misty mountain and quietly entered. Fellow Taoist, you've also seen the ferocity and methods of that monster. How could the disciples of my misty mountain be a match for it? Before I noticed, most of the disciples were injured by this monster. Fortunately, this monster was merciful. I have already checked just now, and none of the disciples have died. And this Ling father and son were captured by this monster in just a few moves. I don't understand what the monster is mumbling about. Just when that monster was about to use Feiyun as a threat, the entire dense fog mountain was filled with lightning. I think fellow Taoist Xiao must have arrived in time. Speaking up to here, Ling Jingyi bowed once more and said, I thank fellow Taoist Xiao once more. This is already the second time fellow Taoist Xiao has saved my misty mountain from a life and death situation. Get up. Xiaohua hurriedly helped Ling Jingyi up and said with a smile, You guys are all lucky because of Xue. If she didn't want to go back to the misty mountain to take a look, I'm afraid the consequences would be unimaginable. Oh? Ling Jingyi didn't ask Xue previously. Now, he was a little puzzled. Looking at Xue, he said, Xue, you've cultivated to the late stage of foundation establishment with great difficulty. Your cultivation has already surpassed uncle's. Your future is limitless. If you have nothing to do, don't miss Misty Mountain. Otherwise, it will cause the dissatisfaction of the Imperial Thunder sect. Yes, this boy understands. Shui didn't have an extremely clear view of the sect like Fairy Hongxia. Every action of hers represented the Imperial Thunder sect. Thus, she casually agreed. Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, looking at that fire ape's meaning, it should be familiar with that monster. And that monster should also be looking for the fire ape in Misty Mountain. It's just that I don't know how the two beasts met and what their motives are. Ling Feiyun shrugged his shoulders and said with a bitter smile, that's right. I also don't understand what that monster is saying. If it really looks similar to the fire ape, then I should be able to understand. But it looks similar to a human, and its words can't be understood. Who knows what it wants to do? This, when I have the chance in the future, I will ask. Xiaohua nodded and said, fellow Taoist Xiao. Ling Jingyi looked at Shui and said in a low voice, this fire ape should be related to our Misty Mountain. Even Shui is related to it. How did you capture it? Shui's face also revealed a smile and asked, Junior Brother Zhao's surprise should be this fire ape, right? Yes, it's this fire ape. Xiaohua said with a smile. I remember that day when you were refining the sun-moon corona. There was still a soul seal that was not broken. You once said that you wanted to rely on this fire ape. Therefore, this Xiao captured the fire ape and brought it here. It just so happens that we can break the last soul imprint of the sun-moon corona in this fog mountain and fulfill your wish. Thank you, Xiaohua. Shui couldn't help but say. As for this fire ape, it's a long story. Xiaohua said, and briefly explained the situation of him capturing the fire ape. Oh my. After Ling Feiyun finished listening, he was extremely shocked and said, Senior Brother Xiao, you said that this fire ape actually broke into the Ming Mountains by itself? It actually has a relationship with the drought demon there? Yes. Xiaohua patted his spirit storage pouch and said with a smile, this fire ape is a person with a wide range of connections. It has face wherever it goes. It's really useful. Otherwise, how could I keep it? This fire ape. I don't know how long it has lived. According to what I know, just being imprisoned in the flame forest marsh alone would take more than 1,000 years, right? Ling Jingyi sighed and said, maybe before it was imprisoned, it was also a famous person. No matter how powerful it is, it can't be compared to Senior Brother Xiao. Ling Feiyun said with a smile, after 1,000 years, didn't it obediently fall into Senior Brother Zhao's hands? Forget it, it's not about this. Xiaohua waved his hand and looked at the stairs in the distance that were almost cleaned up. He said with a smile, fellow Taoist Ling, you should first fix the restriction of the Misty Mountain. I came here in a panic and tore the formation. It's okay. Even if the whole thing is torn, what's the big deal? After all, it's to save us father and son. Ling Jingyi waved his hand and said, later, I will take the formation diagram and spin some more spirit stones. Fellow Taoist Ling, you should take care of this first. I will follow Shui to the back mountain. Since we have already asked for leave from the sect, we will stay in the Misty Mountain for a few more days and see if we can break the Sun-Moon Crown Soul Seal. Xiaohua said with a smile. Okay, Ling Jingyi nodded and didn't say anything else. He brought Ling Feiyun and many other disciples to repair the formation. Although Ling Jingyi said it lightly, the entire battle was weakened by Xiaohua. The center of the formation was even torn. How could it be easy to repair? Without several days or even 10 days of work, it was impossible to completely repair it. Of course, now that Xiaohua, a nascent soul realm cultivator of the Imperial Thunder sect, was in charge of the Misty Mountain, Ling Jingyi wasn't afraid of people coming to provoke them. Arriving at the palace that still looked cold and desolate, Xiaohua held Shui's hand and sighed with emotion. Time seemed to flow, and they returned to several decades ago. The two's appearance didn't change. This palace was also old and messy as before, but Xiangyang and Yin Qinglian weren't by their side. Xiaohua accompanied Shui to walk around the palace a few times, but didn't see anything special. He smiled and asked, Wife, it seems like this palace belongs to you alone. Fellow Taoist Ling and the others didn't even take half a step into this place. In the future, when you and I dual cultivate, This will be our residence. He, of course, Shui said with a smile. If Xiaohua is willing, you can come here often in the future. It's just that although this place looks grand, there are no people. Wouldn't it be lonely with just the two of us? Speaking of this, Shui's face immediately turned red. As Shui expected, Xiaohua wrapped his arms around Shui and said with a smile, then we can give birth to a group of children and teach them cultivation every day. Wouldn't this palace be lively? Shui didn't dodge, which was rare, and said with a bit of infatuation in her eyes, yes, this is also what I was thinking. With so many children, would I be lonely? Xiaohua hugged Shui, and Shui looked at the cold palace. It seemed that only the two of them were there, and this warmth gradually warmed up the entire palace. After a long time, Xiaohua said in a low voice, Shui, don't worry, I will accompany you. No matter if the world is old or the seas are dry and the rocks are rotten. Shui smiled and said, I know. I will also follow you, no matter if it's the imperial court or the 9 underworlds. At this point, Xiaohua and Shui didn't want to say another word. They could only feel each other's sincerity through the intertwining of their fingers. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, Xiaohua said in a low voice, Wife, should I release the fire ape? Should I take out the sun-moon corona and break the last restriction? Shui moved her gaze away from the twilight and looked at Xiaohua with some reluctance. She shook her head and said, let's forget about it for today. Let's wait a few more days. I'm a bit tired. Okay. Hearing that Shui was a bit tired, Xiaohua didn't say anything else and hurriedly nodded. Sit down. I'll rest on your lap for a while. Shui looked around and said in a low voice. Xiaohua looked at Shui's pale face and didn't understand why she suddenly acted so inappropriately. He hurriedly clapped his hands and took out a few praying mats and placed them on the ground. Shui laid on the praying mat beside Xiaohua and rested her head on Xiaohua's lap. Feeling the warmth on Shui's neck, Xiaohua placed his hand on Shui's black hair and gently stroked it. Darling Xiao, Shui's voice was a bit ethereal. I really like this kind of time. Even if you and I don't have much cultivation, even if you and I don't have much lifespan, as long as you can quietly accompany me like this, I don't need any other pursuits. -11. Chapter 30:23. Silly child, Xiaohua smiles. You and I have succeeded in cultivation. Even if we don't work hard now, we will still have several hundred years of lifespan. Wait until I receive my reward for the battle. Then I will ask Master's wife to come to your Sunlei Palace to propose marriage. It doesn't matter if your Sunlei Palace agrees or not. You are going to be my wife in any case. In the future, your husband doesn't dare to say that I will accompany you quietly every night, but I can always stay by your side, watch your happiness, watch your sadness, accompany you in your cultivation, accompany you in your adventures. I can always promise you that. Yes, I believe Xiao can do it. Shui tilts her head and says very solemnly, this misty mountain is where I was born. Xiaohua must take care of it in the future. I won't talk about Uncle's matter, but you have to worry about Fei Yun. I know, Xiaohua says with a smile. Fei Yun is sincere and sincere, different from his father. I also like him very much. If there is anything inappropriate in the future, you can let him find us. Oh, why did you suddenly think of this today? It's nothing, Shui says with a smile. Fei Yun didn't enter a cultivation sect, so Misty Mountain also doesn't have any backing. This kind of cultivation family will have some difficulties in the Xiaoyu continent, so I said a few more words. Hee, don't we still have you and me? What are you afraid of? Xiaohua says with a smile. I made a bit of a name in the great battle of Dowan Sword. If others know of my relationship with Misty Mountain, I'm afraid they won't come looking for trouble, right? Yes, you are absolutely right. Shui answers somewhat drowsily, and after a while, she actually falls asleep. A bitter smile hangs on Xiaohua's lips. He knows that as long as a cultivator hasn't reached the stage of mental and physical exhaustion, they can generally use meditation to replace sleep. But Shui actually fell asleep like this. She must have been cultivating diligently all this time, and her heart must be extremely bitter. Looking at Shui's pale face and her slightly knitted brows, Xiaohua doesn't even dare to move, and also closes his eyes. However, Xiaohua didn't fall asleep like Xue Xue. Instead, his mind entered the space and urged the human-shaped origin spirit to continue refining pills. He also took out the bone that was used to refine the heaven-pacifying rod and carefully examined it. To an ordinary person, a night was just closing and opening their eyes. Their mind was still thinking about everything that happened before they went to sleep. Even a child who didn't know any better would think that they weren't asleep at all. For a cultivator like Xiaohua, who was already used to squandering the night, it was even more so in the blink of an eye. Xue Xue, who was resting on Xiaohua's lap, moved slightly. Xiaohua immediately opened his eyes and saw that there were some faint traces of moisture on his Taoist robe. Xue Xue seemed to be trying to cover it up. Xiaohua smiled. He thought that this was saliva left behind by Xue Xue when she was sleeping. It was common for ordinary people to have such saliva. However, cultivators' control over their bodies had long surpassed that of ordinary people. It was only when Xue Xue was completely relaxed and didn't treat herself as a cultivator. Only when her spiritual power was completely relaxed could such an extremely rare situation occur. Xue Xue got up from Xiaohua's side and stretched lazily. Her hands stretched over her head, and her towering chest trembled even more. An indescribable temptation made Xiaohua's heart heat up. Xue Xue very keenly glared at Xiaohua and said, "I seem to have not slept like this since I was 4 or 5 years old. Last night, I seem to have returned to childhood. It really was a dreamless night, a sweet sleep." Xiaohua somewhat awkwardly covered up his Taoist robe. Although he had already succeeded in refining his body and tempering his bones, he still couldn't control his body's natural reaction. Of course, he didn't need to hide too much in front of Xue Xue. He immediately smiled and said, "We cultivators pursue the heavenly Tao and meditate. Although we can meditate instead of sleep, the excitement of ordinary people's sleep is gone. I don't know if it's a gain or a loss. Gains and losses are all in a single thought. Who knows if it's a gain or a loss?" Xue Xue tidied up her Taoist robe and looked at the empty palace hall. She said, "Perhaps when my ancestors built this palace in my early years, they felt it was a great achievement. But now, this palace is empty and devoid of people. What's the difference between this and not building it? Wouldn't the gains from my early years have already become nothing?" As she said that, she said with some hidden bitterness, "Perhaps being able to accompany my husband Xiao and sleep sweetly is still better than this gain, right? Haha, you're indeed a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. You've comprehended more than your husband." Xiaohua laughed loudly. No matter how much I cultivate, I've been in seclusion day and night for these 10 years, and I'm only at the late stage of foundation establishment." Xue Xue curled her lips and said, "But husband, you actually have the strength of a nascent soul cultivator in just one big battle. Thinking about it, I'm disheartened. No matter how much I cultivate, I can't catch up to you. Don't compare with me." Xiaohua looked around with a narcissistic appearance and said proudly, "This Xiao is a cultivation genius that only appears once in 10 million years in Dawn Rain Continent. In the future, the heavy responsibility of saving Dawn Rain Continent will fall on this Xiao. If this Xiao's cultivation isn't high, how can I carry out heaven's will? Heavenly Tao, luck Tao." This sentence seemed to have poked Xue Xue. Xue Xue was immediately dumbfounded like a clay statue. What's wrong? Xiaohua didn't dare to say too much, afraid of disturbing Xue Xue's comprehension. After waiting for half a cup of tea's time, he saw a trace of enlightenment on Xue Xue's face. Only then did he ask, "Nothing. You have your luck Tao, I have my luck Tao. Our luck Tao might be different. You're a shooting star and I'm a firefly, but this luck Tao is ultimately mine." Xue Xue smiled. "Since that's the case, what else do I have to complain about?" "What do you have to complain about?" Xiaohua asked curiously. Nothing." Xue Xue shook her head. "Husband, this was left behind by this concubine's ancestor. It really is a secret technique to break the last restriction of the sun-moon corona. This concubine can't wait to see what kind of luck Tao this concubine has." As she spoke, Xue Xue carefully took out a red string from around her neck. She was unwilling to tear the string apart, and took out a milky white jade pendant from between her jade-like breasts. When placed in Xiao Hua's hand, it still had its own warmth and sweetness. Xiao Hua's heart unconsciously swayed, and he glanced at Xue Xue with a smile. Xue Xue's skin was originally white, and now that it flashed with a blush, it became even more like the jade in Xiao Hua's hand. AI, a beauty like jade, a sword like a rainbow. The ancients really didn't lie. Xiao Hua sighed and immersed his divine sense into the jade pendant. At first, Xiao Hua's expression was still indifferent, but after looking for a while, he frowned. Raising his head to look at Xue Xue, he asked doubtfully, Xue Xue, are you sure this is a secret technique left behind by your ancestor to break the last restriction of the sun-moon corona? What's wrong? Xue Xue was startled and asked curiously, this jade pendant is something this concubine has been carrying on her since she could remember. Is there something wrong with it? Hee, it's nothing. Xiao Hua shook his head. Presumably, you've seen it yourself. Don't you think the technique inside is too strange? If you didn't know your husband, I'm afraid you really wouldn't be able to find a suitable person to break the last restriction of the sun-moon corona. Hee, isn't this concubine's luck? Xue Xue laughed. If you can't find a suitable person, this restriction will always be with you and won't be broken. As far as this concubine knows, this restriction of the sun-moon corona has been in place for a very long time. And Xiao Hua didn't say anything else and carefully examined and comprehended it. This examination took several days. There were many things inside the jade pendant. Besides the method to break the sun-moon corona's restriction, there were also some other secret techniques. Xue Xue didn't forbid Xiao Hua from looking, so he casually looked through them. Among them was the method to create a life and death slip. With one glance, Xiao Hua knew that this was the pink jade pendant that Xue Xue gave him. It was also very clear that unless the caster opened it himself, the restriction of the life and death slip could only be removed after the caster died. However, Xiao Hua only looked at it, and then focused on breaking the sun-moon corona's restriction. As Xiao Hua said, this method was very strange. It actually involved the blood shadow technique. Although Xiao Hua knew the Devil Realm's blood coagulation technique, there were still some differences, so he had to be careful. Seeing that Xiao Hua was comprehending, Xue Xue didn't disturb him and left the palace. The front of the misty mountain had now returned to normal. The thick fog in the sky gradually surged. Although the fog was very uneven, it was obvious that the misty mountain's protective formation had only been repaired for a few days. Sister. Seeing Xue Xue coming out from the back of the mountain, Ling Feiyun had already flown down from the sky and called out with a smile. Yes, Feiyun. Has the formation been repaired? Xue Xue dotingly looked at her brother who grew up with her. In 4 days. Ling Feiyun looked at the sky. Father and I have already done our best, but we are not very proficient in formations, so it will take a lot of effort to repair it. Oh, I forgot, Xue Xue said with a smile. Xiao Hua knows formations, so we should let him repair it. Ah, senior brother Xiao also knows formations. Ling Feiyun was really surprised. Little brother thinks that senior brother Xiao must be a person who concentrates on cultivation. Moreover, I heard from sister that he is a rogue cultivator, so he doesn't know formations. He seems to know everything. Xue Xue thought for a moment and said, and he is very good at everything? Can he have children? Ling Feiyun very mysteriously blinked his eyes. Xue Xue's face was stunned. She glared at Ling Feiyun and scolded, Feiyun, you are courting death. Hee, I don't dare. Ling Feiyun pretended to be afraid and raised his hand. Little brother just wanted to remind sister that father was talking about it the day before yesterday. You should also hold the dual cultivation ceremony, right? Little brother heard that. At this point, Ling Feiyun lowered his voice and said, Senior brother Xiao seems to have an affair with Huan Hua Sex Hongxia Fairy. Sister, you must be careful. What do you mean by an affair? Xue Xue said unhappily. Hongxia Fairy and Xiao Hua have known each other for a long time. If you were talking about an affair, aren't you talking about sister? -11. Chapter 30-24. When Ling Feiyun heard this, he was a little dumbfounded. He hurriedly said, It's all my fault. However, elder sister, If you're talking about this, then you must seize the opportunity even more. Senior brother Xiao and Fairy Hongxia have been fighting in the Dao sword battle for more than 10 years, yet you are cultivating alone in the Imperial Thunder sect? Now that senior brother Xiao and Hongxia Fairy are famous, if the two of them cultivate together, many people would like to see it. You don't need to say this. Shui nodded. Knowing that this was the concern of a relative, Sister naturally knows what to do. Today, Sister entrusted you with a task. I was afraid that you didn't know Hongxia Fairy. Since you know her, then it's best. Shui patted her hand and took out a pink jade slip from her storage bag. She handed it to Ling Feiyun and said, "This is for Hongxia Fairy. When Sister and Xiao Hua leave the Misty Mountain, you go to the Huan Hua sect. You must personally give this to Hongxia Fairy." This? Ling Feiyun took the jade slip and was a little confused. Can't you give it to her yourself? You let Sister and Hongxia Fairy fight for Xiao Hua. How can Sister lower her head and look for her? Shui laughed. But Ling Feiyun put away the jade slip and didn't dare to rashly look at it. He scratched his head and said, "Hongxia Fairy is a meritorious disciple of the Huan Hua sect. Can I see her?" "Don't worry. As long as you say that you are Sister's brother, she will definitely see you." Shui laughed. "Moreover, you can also tell her that you want to bring her news of Xiao Hua." Okay. Ling Feiyun naturally couldn't refuse Shui's request. He nodded and then said with a smile, "Sister, can you talk to senior brother Xiao and give me some pointers in my cultivation? Look at you. You are now in the late stage of foundation establishment. You have already surpassed father. Senior brother Xiao. Alas, there is no need to talk about him. I have been cultivating for so long. Since the last time I saw senior brother Xiao, my true blood was stimulated and my cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. Now, in these few years, I seem to have reached a bottleneck and can't break through. If I can get senior brother Zhao's pointers, if that's the case, I think you should rely on yourself." When Shui hears this, she immediately shakes her head and says, "First of all, Xiao Hua isn't your master. He doesn't know the details of your cultivation. His words can only be based on his own understanding. His understanding, Sai, I won't hide it from you. Even if elder sister is in this realm, I'm afraid it's not easy for her to understand, let alone you. Maybe it won't bring you any benefits. Instead, it will give you more questions, which is not beneficial to your cultivation. Secondly, on the path of cultivation, bottlenecks exist at all times. If you always want to borrow power, how can you go far on the path of cultivation? Today, Xiao Hua helped you break through your bottleneck, but what about in the future? Listen to Elder Sister. Elder Sister has been in closed-door meditation for more than 10 years. I don't know how many bottlenecks she has encountered, but Elder Sister has overcome all of them. Isn't Elder Sister already a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator? Thinking back to when we were young, we thought that foundation establishment was already amazing, but now, Jindan is also within reach. Yes, I understand. Ling Feiyun nodded thoughtfully. Moreover, Elder Sister doesn't want to ask Xiao Hua for anything right now, and even more, I don't want others to look down on our Misty Mountain. Shui pursed her lips and smiled. Yes. Ling Feiyun puffed out his chest and said, "Since little brother didn't enter the Shanghua sect and chose my Misty Mountain's inheritance, then he will face a difficult path. Little brother will walk this path to the end." Good. You have ambition. With this kind of heart, you may not be too far behind Xiao Hua. Shui said with a smile, then looked at the place where Ling Feiyun just landed and said, "Let's go. Let's see how Uncle's repair is going." After staying in the Misty Mountain for a full 3 days, seeing that the Misty Mountain's array was repaired, Xiao Hua sent a message to Shui to return to the palace. When Ling Jingyi was repairing the array, he had already heard Shui mention this matter, and he was also a bit excited in his heart. After all, Shui's relationship with the Misty Mountain was a bit different, and he also felt that he owed Shui something. Moreover, he himself had long understood the restrictions in the Sun Moon Corona, and he had even worked on it a long time ago. Wasn't the Flame Forest Mountain's action of releasing the Fire Ape one of his actions? Of course, Ling Jingyi also had some principles, and he didn't take away the jade that belonged to Shui, and had always been leaving it to Shui. Of course, As for the ownership of the Sun Moon Corona, it was already a mess, and even Ling Jingyi didn't know whether it belonged to the Misty Mountain or Shui Shui. The mystery that he wanted to know for many years was now about to be solved, and Ling Jingyi naturally had some expectations. Therefore, when they saw Xiao Hua send a message, the two immediately urged Shui Shui to return. Even the two of them wanted to follow. However, due to the ancestral teachings, Ling Jingyi and Ling Feiyun couldn't get close to the palace, and only Shui Shui returned. As soon as Shui Shui entered the palace, she saw Xiao Hua forming hand seals, and as he muttered, the fire ape rolled back and forth in front of the palace's entrance. Needless to say, when Xiao Hua let the fire ape out, it grimaced in pain. Shui Shui didn't say anything and just stood to the side. After waiting for half a cup of tea, the fire ape was tormented enough and weakly curled up on the ground. Only then did Xiao Hua stop his hand seals and coldly said, "This Xiao has always been benevolent and won't make things too difficult for others. Now that you've fallen into this Xiao's hands, you should be respectful and obedient, and if this Xiao is happy, maybe I'll let you go. Otherwise, this Xiao will take care of you every time I let you out." It was unknown whether the fire ape understood or not, but it kept groaning, and the ominous glint in its crimson eyes didn't weaken. It was far from the obedient appearance of the monster that Xiao Hua later put into his spirit storage bag. Oomph! Xiao Hua also didn't find it strange, and with a point of his finger, a sharp sword light was born, and it pierced the fire ape's calf, and a wisp of blood flowed out from the wound. However, the fire ape had already stopped groaning, and it was firm, and it didn't even groan. Xiao Hua grabbed with his hand, and that wisp of blood flew into the air, and condensed into a thumb-sized ball of blood in front of Xiao Hua's eyes. Xiao Hua glanced at the fire ape, and the golden light around his body flourished, and a wisp of spiritual fire was immediately spat out from his mouth. Then, his magic power surged out like a wave, and he used the spiritual fire to burn that ball of blood according to the blood-refining technique in the jade pendant. Looking at the spiritual fire dancing in the air as if it had a life of its own, and the wisps of fire were like spirit snakes going in and out of the blood, the fire ape's eyes clearly flashed with shock. However, this shock was driven away by its unruly nature as the flames danced in its eyes. Seeing that the ball of blood was getting smaller and smaller, and was only the size of a soybean, that ball of blood suddenly swelled in the spiritual fire, and a weak ape's roar came from that ball of blood. Although it was very light, that kind of anger and unruly nature was extremely clear. Roar, the fire ape couldn't bear it anymore, and it roared towards the sky, echoing the roar from the ball of blood. Then, the fire ape began to become irritable again, and the flames around its body became dazzling again. If it was at the beginning, Xiao Hua feared that it would be difficult to control the situation, but at this time, Xiao Hua was already familiar with the blood-refining technique. While he controlled the spiritual fire, he cast a spell in his hand, and the fire ape rolled on the ground again under the effect of the Sun Moon Corona. However, Shui Shui also clearly saw that the fire ape's irritation was not only because of the roar from the ball of blood, but also because the fire ape would occasionally tilt its head and look inside the palace from time to time. It seemed that this familiar place provoked the fire ape's ferocious nature. Roar, a slightly loud ape's roar sounded again, and an inch-long fire ape's shadow emerged from the ball of blood, and at the same time, the ball of blood unexpectedly turned into a wisp of black smoke and disappeared in midair. Rise, Xiao Hua pointed his hand at the fire ape, and the Sun Moon Corona issued a rumbling sound, and unexpectedly flew from the fire ape's forehead. The fire ape's face showed joy, and the flames around its body flourished, and it was about to rush towards the palace door. "You think you can escape?" Xiao Hua sneered, and with a flick of his left hand, the universe inside sleeve covered the fire ape and easily put it into the spirit storage bag. Wong 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 wong. The Sun Moon Corona slowly rotated in midair, and the sound became louder and louder. "Shui Shui, you also take out a drop of heart's blood." Xiao Hua methodically controlled the Sun Moon Corona and cast a spell. The two magic tools of the Sun Moon Corona rotated, and a burst of obscure magic power was born from the gap, slowly spreading to the entire palace. Shue Shue did not dare to neglect, and hurriedly patted her chest, and a drop of dark red flew out, and Shue Shue's face instantly turned white. Go. Xiao Hua looked distressed, and the spiritual fire lingering on the fire ape's shadow rushed to Shue Shue's blood essence, and condensed like before. It seemed that Shue Shue's blood essence was even more difficult to condense than the fire ape's. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Xiao Hua's forehead was covered in sweat. Roar! A hoarse roar that was like muffled thunder suddenly rushed into Shue Shue's ears. Shue Shue raised her eyebrows, and surprise appeared in her eyes. An inch-long lightning beast phantom actually flew out of the blood essence. Ah! Shue Shue turned pale with fright. She was previously thinking that if her blood shadow came out, it would be very embarrassing if it was naked. But she never thought that it was actually the ugly lightning beast's doing, especially that although it was very small, it had extremely obvious breasts. Shue Shue's face was abnormally red. She stole a glance at Xiao Hua, and contrary to Shue Shue's expectations, Xiao Hua, who always cared about this, actually had a dignified expression, and simply did not have time to look at the blood shadow, because his spell was once again like rain falling on the sun-moon corona. Along with the roar of the sun-moon corona, the two magic tools gradually emitted a golden and silver brilliance, and the two brilliants alternately flashed, illuminating the entire palace, and the brilliance even penetrated the palace, attracting the attention of Ling Jingyi and Ling Feiyun. Rumble! Suddenly, a thunderous sound came from the sun-moon corona, and at the same time, an extremely dazzling electric light came from the sun-moon corona, and unexpectedly, Shue Shue couldn't help but close her eyes. -11. Chapter 30-25. At the same time Shue Shue closed her eyes, she couldn't help but groan in her heart. She really didn't expect that although Xiao Hua's refining of the sun-moon corona was dangerous, it was never that complicated. Now it was only the last restriction, but it was actually so complicated. Moreover, she finally understood what Xiao Hua meant. Aside from Xiao Hua, it really wasn't easy for her to find another cultivator who could break this restriction. Go! Xiao Hua was clearly also stunned, but he was calm. He waved his hand, and the spirit fire wrapped around the fire ape and rushed into the moon shadow. Roar! The sound of the fire ape became louder, and at the same time, the entire moon shadow emitted a brilliant electric light. It was several times brighter than the moon in the night sky. It surrounded the radiant sun and spun at an incomparably fast speed. It was almost impossible to see its outline. Shue Shue, sit cross-legged. Xiao Hua shouted, right now? As he spoke, Xiao Hua pointed at the spirit fire again. The spirit fire flashed a trace of fire, and the lightning beast's shadow was also pulled into the radiant sun. Roar! Similarly, after the lightning beast's hoarse roar, the radiant sun emitted rolling thunder. The entire radiant sun began to spin on its own, and the direction it was spinning in was completely different from the moon shadow. Xiao Hua finally stopped. He was somewhat dumbstruck as he looked at the strange scene in front of him. Right now, the outline of the sun-moon corona could no longer be seen. There was only the rolling thunder in the middle and the flashing electric light at the edges of the thunder. A kind of déjà vu feeling slowly emerged in Xiao Hua's heart. Kacha! A loud thunder sound shook the entire palace. The soul imprint in the sun-moon corona actually broke free from the magic tool and became several feet large. That soul imprint violently shook, and the surrounding space gradually distorted. Traces of black gas with green light appeared from the void and rushed towards that tumbling soul imprint. Xiao Hua looked at it with some surprise. Before he could open his mouth to ask Shue Shue, who was already sitting cross-legged, the soul imprint actually shattered, turning into thousands of green lights like fireflies. These fireflies seemed to have a life of their own. They flapped their invisible wings and flew up. Soon, they gathered into a pitch-black shadow with a flickering green light. This shadow was somewhat similar to the Thunder Beast. However, when Xiao Hua took a closer look, there were still some differences. However, before Xiao Hua could take a closer look, a pitch-black brilliance shot out from the black shadow's eyes and shone directly between Shue Shue's eyebrows. A pitch-black pattern that looked like a bolt of lightning was born from that brilliance. When the pattern was formed, a huge gust of wind blew and thunder rumbled. Boom! An incomprehensible sound was faintly discernible. It was extremely obscure and ancient. Following this sound, the black shadow turned into a bolt of lightning and rushed into Xue Xue's forehead. Xue Xue let out a heart-wrenching scream as she held her head with both hands and fainted on the ground. Xue Xue! Xiaohua was shocked. He rushed to Xue Xue's side and grabbed her wrist. After carefully inspecting, Xiaohua was relieved. His gaze fell on Xue Xue's pale face. He saw a pitch-black brilliance flickering on Xue Xue's pale face. It was extremely rhythmic, and following this rhythm, the lightning pattern between her eyebrows was also pulsating, as if it was the same flashing heart. Another inheritance. Xiaohua frowned. He saw Fairy Hong Xia obtain the inheritance of the phoenix in the ancestral shrine of Million Ming Mountains. Now, he saw Xue Xue obtain the inheritance of the Thunder Beast in Misty Mountain. If only one person obtained the inheritance, then it would be rare. However, if everyone could obtain the inheritance, then wouldn't it be common? This Xiaoyu continent is about to change. Xiaohua couldn't help but think. Xiaohua waited for an hour, but he didn't see any signs of Xue Xue waking up. Thus, he raised his head and looked at the sun-moon corona that was still flashing with lightning. He pointed his finger, and the magic tool gradually stopped. With a so sound, a message talisman flew in from outside the hall and landed in front of Xue Xue. Xiaohua knew that Ling Jingyi was worried about Xue Xue. Just as he was about to stand up, a pada sound rang out. Something fell out of the sun-moon corona. Oh! Xiaohua's eyes swept over the object, and he couldn't help but stare blankly. The object that fell out of the sun-moon corona was actually a grayish-white bone. Soul cultivator? Xiaohua grabbed the bone with his hand and examined it with his soul sense. Shaking his head slightly, he seemed to be muttering to himself, so it really is a soul cultivator. This Misty Mountain— oh wait, Xue Xue's ancestors should be related to soul cultivators. Right, the Misty Mountain also has a rarely seen decorated archway, and the Misty Clouds sect has one as well. I heard Ling Jingyi say that the Flying Phoenix Ridge also has a decorated archway. It seems they are both soul cultivator inheritances. If the Misty Cloud sect has the ability to control clouds and rain, then the Misty Mountains and Flying Phoenix Ridge. While thinking, Xiaohua subconsciously looked at the sun-moon corona that had stopped in midair. Forget it. I'll wait until Xue Xue wakes up. Xiaohua stood up and walked out of the palace. In front of the back mountain, Ling Zhengyi, Ling Feiyun, and several dozen Misty Mountain's disciples were anxiously waiting. After all, the commotion in the palace was too big. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Seeing Xiaohua fly out, Ling Jingyi hurriedly asked, "How is Xue Xue?" "She's already received the inheritance, but is currently unconscious. I'm afraid she's receiving it." Xiaohua smiled. "When the time is right, she should be able to wake up." That's good, that's good." Ling Jingyi let out a sigh of relief, even a bit excited. "My Misty Mountains have been waiting for this moment for who knows how many years." This Ling didn't think this would happen to Xue Xue. This Ling. Ling Jingyi was so excited that he couldn't speak. The nearby disciples were also very excited when they heard this. "That's enough. Fellow Taoist Xiao, hurry and go take care of Xue Xue. Don't let anything happen to her." Ling Jingyi woke up. This Ling also wants to pass this good news to Flying Phoenix Mountain Range. When the disciples there know about it, they will definitely be very happy. This Xiao understands. Xiaohua nodded and flew back to the back mountain. Many disciples of Misty Mountains also dispersed happily. Xiaohua stayed by Xue Xue's side. After 9 days, Xue Xue slowly woke up. The strange thing was that the pitch-black lightning pattern actually dimmed and finally disappeared into the space between Xue Xue's eyebrows. "Xue Xue?" Xiaohua exclaimed in a low voice. Seeing Xue Xue open her eyes, a pitch-black lightning flashed in her black pupils. "Darling Xiao," Xue Xue replied, her brows slightly wrinkled. Obviously, her head was still in pain. "Is this your ancestors' inheritance?" Xiaohua probed. "I'm not sure. Shue Shue unexpectedly replied. Previously, this concubine only felt an intense pain, as if an axe had split open my head. I fell into countless pitch-black lightning. Now, although it's not that painful, I only feel that my mind is in a mess. It's as if I understood something, but also as if I don't know anything. I don't have the slightest clue. And then take your time to explain. Xiaohua comforted, then clapped his hands and took out the bone. Handing it to Shue Shue, he said, "This is something that fell from the sun-moon corona. Inside is a record of the Thunder Palace. It should be together with the soul seal." "What is this?" Shue Shue took it and scanned it with her divine sense. Unexpectedly, she didn't see anything. Feeling strange, she asked, "How do you know that there is a record of the Thunder Palace here?" "This is a bone. It's used by soul cultivators to record things. It's similar to the jade slips of my Tao sect." Xiaohua smiled. "You can only use your soul consciousness to check it. So it's like that." Shue Shue understood. Looking at the empty hall to her left, she mocked herself. This concubine didn't know that this palace was called the Thunder Palace. Moreover, what could be recorded in the Thunder Palace? Haha, you can't imagine that this Thunder Palace has a great origin. Xiaohua pointed with his hand and said, "This palace is only the surface. Inside, there are things related to thunder beasts. Of course, as for what exactly it is, this Xiao doesn't know." "This?" Shue Shue hesitated for a moment, then said in a low voice, "This matter. Does uncle need to know?" Xiaohua thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "This husband doesn't know. However, since it's the ancestral teachings, it's best that he doesn't know. Moreover, if this matter were to spread, it would bring disaster to Misty Mountain. After all, Misty Mountain's current strength is still too weak." "All right, this concubine will listen to husband Xiao." Shue Shue nodded. Looking at the empty palace again, she asked in confusion, "Where could the entrance be?" "This concubine has already carefully searched this palace." "Far away on the horizon, but close in front of you," Xiaohua pointed at the palace's door and said, "This palace's door is where the entrance is located." "How strange." Shue Shue followed the direction of Xiaohua's finger and scanned it with her divine sense. However, other than the palace's door, she didn't see anything special. "Watch your husband," Xiaohua said with a smile. Then, Xiaohua's body flashed with a dark green brilliance, and a series of rumbling sounds flew out from his body. Then, the green light turned into thumb-sized strange creatures and flew towards the palace's door. Boom! Another loud sound rang out, and countless green seal characters appeared at the palace's door. These green seal characters flew out in spirals and gradually extended until they reached Xiaohua and Shue Shue's feet. Unexpectedly, they formed a long flight of stairs, and the end of the flight of stairs was right below the palace's door. "Let's go. Let's see what kind of secret is hidden under this Thunder Palace." Xiaohua pulled Shue Shue's hand and stepped on the green seal characters. The green seal characters were like butterflies flapping their wings, carrying Xiaohua and Shue Shue's divine bear down to the palace's door. "Husband Xiao." Shue Shue looked at this magical moment and smiled. This seems to be the method of the Million Ming Mountain soul cultivators. Even if uncle is here and knows that the palace's door is the entrance, he shouldn't have any method to open the palace's door, right? I'm afraid it won't work." Xiaohua nodded. "There should be a soul armament that can open the palace's door, but that soul armament consumes one's lifespan, so it's best not to use it." -11. Chapter 3026. Shue Shue is a little shocked. Looking at Xiaohua's expression, she says anxiously, "Husband, are you all right?" "Hee, husband is fine," Xiaohua says. The two of them are already wrapped up by the green seal text and are pulled into the palace door. Xiaohua only sees a green light in front of his eyes. Moreover, he doesn't feel like he is being teleported. However, when he opens his eyes again, he and Shue Shue are already in a huge space. This space is similar to the space Misty Cloud saw. There are no pillars. Everything in the space can be seen at a glance. Moreover, the entire space is filled with a faint green light. It is impossible to see where this light is coming from. Darling Xiao. Xue Xue stands beside Xiao Hua. Looking left and right, she pulls Xiao Hua's robe and points behind Xiao Hua. She says in a low voice, "Look, what is this?" Hearing this, Xiao Hua turns his head and is overjoyed. This is a stone wall that is more than 10 zhang tall. It is erected there. The bottom is touching the ground and the top is supporting the space. In front of this stone wall, there is a huge stone chair. It is also similar to the one in Misty Clouds. What is special is that behind this stone chair, there is a huge green seal text engraved on the stone wall. Lightning. It is indeed the lightning word. Xiao Hua ponders. What word is this? Xue Xue asks in a low voice. Lightning. Lightning as in lightning. Xiao Hua replies. Then, he looks again and says, Xue Xue, you stay a little further away. Your husband needs this green seal text. Okay. Xue Xue hurriedly flies to the side and looks at Xiao Hua with concern. Xiao Hua walks to the front of the stone wall. The thousands of soul strands in Ming Ruo Tian pass through the magic eye imprint and reach towards the green seal text. When those soul strands touch the green seal text immediately flashes with green light. The entire text floats out from the stone wall and gradually turns into a huge word formed by many green seal text. Immediately after, these green seal text flashes one after another. Xiao Hua's soul strands also trembles along with these flashes. In an instant, cryptic and strange syllables rang out clearly in Xiao Hua's mind. Similar to the situation in the Misty Clouds sect, every time the syllable was released, the entire mysterious dark cloud would churn once. When the entire green seal text flashed once, the syllable also resounded once. Whether it was Ming Ruo Sky, Qing Shun Sky, or Huan Qi Sky, real thunder was born out of nothing. This thunder was exactly the same as the thunder in the sky. Along with this thunder, countless bolts of lightning fell like rain. Thunder roll technique. Xiao Hua squinted his eyes, carefully comprehending the green seal characters that were dancing around him, and thought to himself, this thunder roll technique is obviously different from the thunder drawing technique. The Thunder Beast's thunder drawing technique is to draw down the heavenly lightning that exists and control it. But this thunder roll technique is to use the green seal characters to cause the heavenly lightning to change the heavens and earth, creating heavenly lightning out of nothing. The difference between the two is obvious. After a while, Xiao Hua had already memorized the incantation of the thunder roll technique, and the 36 green seal characters also fell into Xiao Hua's Ming Ruo Sky. Looking at the stone wall again, the green seal characters had already dimmed quite a bit. When the green light around Xiao Hua disappeared, he turned around, and Xue Xue asked with concern, Darling Xiao, how is it done? Xiao Hua said with a smile, with your husband taking action, what can't he do? Is that so? Then can you tell this concubine, who is sitting on this huge stone chair? Xue Xue pointed at the stone chair and asked, what kind of chair does a normal person need? Such a huge stone chair is naturally for a giant to sit on. Xiao Hua replied without hesitation, but when he said this, he was stunned again. Misty Clouds sect had a huge stone chair, and Misty Mountains also had one. If it was for a giant to sit on, then wouldn't there be two giants? What does this giant have to do with the Huan country's giant? Then, the huge white bones in his space that he didn't know when he would be able to gather, who was it? This concubine knows it's a giant, but does a normal person have such a big butt? Xue Xue asked unhappily, but what's this giant's origin, and what's its name? This husband doesn't know. Xiao Hua said honestly, could it be there's no record in this bone? Xue Xue asked curiously. Xiao Hua nodded, indeed. This bone only records the method to enter the Thunder Roll Palace and the Spirit Technique. Nothing else. All right, Xue Xue helplessly looked to the left and pointed at a row of stone walls. It seems like we've only seen that side. There's nothing special about the other places. Maybe there is, it's just that we can't see it. Xiao Hua corrected and also flew to that row of stone walls with Xue Xue Xue. Xiao Hua didn't care at first, but when he saw the words engraved on the stone walls, he couldn't help but be shocked. The stone walls were divided into 9, and each wall was engraved with many words. These words were the same as the divine fire technique that Xiao Hua obtained. Since the divine fire technique was an ancient divine technique, Then wouldn't the words engraved on the stone walls also be an ancient divine technique? Sure enough, when Xiaohua saw the 4 large words engraved on the first stone wall, he was so happy that he almost jumped up. That was because those 4 large words were precisely lightning refining technique. Wasn't Xiaohua looking for a refining technique that didn't belong to the 5 elements? Didn't this heavenly lightning not belong to the 5 elements? Then wasn't the lightning refining technique also a refining technique that didn't belong to the 5 elements? Truly wearing out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it without any effort. Xiaohua clapped his hands and shouted. Seeing Xiaohua happy, Shui was also happy. Being able to do something for Xiaohua was her biggest wish. Although this Thunder Roll Palace was passed down by Shui's ancestor, Shui would rather give everything to Xiaohua, only hoping to be able to sleep peacefully. Xiaohua. Shui looked at these strange words and really couldn't distinguish anything. Seeing that Xiaohua wanted to look carefully again, she hurriedly asked, "What is this thing?" "Oh, this is the lightning refining technique. It's an ancient refining technique that uses the power of heavenly lightning to refine an artifact." Seeing Shui ask, Xiaohua suddenly realized and hurriedly said, "It's really the refining technique that your husband has been looking for. Hee. Just now I was so happy that I forgot that this was passed down by my wife's ancestor. Your husband still has to ask for your permission first." Hee. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Shui pursed her lips and laughed. "Isn't everything of this concubine's husband? If you had asked this concubine first, then this concubine would have been unhappy. Now that you don't treat this concubine as an outsider, how can this concubine blame you?" Saying this, Shui looked to the left and frowned. "This place seems to have something else. Forget it, Xiaohua. Now only you can enter and exit this Thunder Palace. You should send this concubine out and comprehend it yourself." Xiaohua looked at the 9 stone walls and said with a bitter smile, "It seems that this is even more complicated than Zhongling Mountain Villa's refining the world. I have no choice but to inconvenience my wife. Being able to do something for my husband, this concubine is very happy." Shui pulled Xiaohua's hand and said with a smile, "While my husband cultivates here, this concubine will accompany uncle and brother. Isn't this the best of both worlds?" "Ha ha ha." Xiaohua held Shui's hand and said, "Your husband only needs to remember this refining technique. There's no need to completely comprehend it here." Unexpectedly, Shui immediately shook her head and said, "This concubine feels that my husband should stay here and comprehend more. After all, it's not easy to come to Misty Mountain in the future." Saying this, Shui helplessly smiled. Yes, Xiaohua entered and exited Thunder Palace's Lei Peak as if he was walking on flat ground. Wouldn't coming to Misty Mountain be as easy as lifting a finger? "As you wish." Shui waved her hand. "This concubine just feels that you'll definitely have a lot of things to do in the future. It's better to take advantage of this leisure, time to comprehend more. Yes?" Xiaohua said with a long voice, "Your husband will listen to my wife's instructions." While laughing, Xiaohua sent Shui out. After standing in the palace, Shui hesitated and asked again, "Xiaohua, this underground Thunder Palace is so secretive. In the future, you and I will be disciples of the Thunder Palace. I'm afraid that it won't be good for us to come back often. Can you make something like a formation plate and give it to Feiyun?" Xiaohua shook his head without hesitation. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Not to mention that this involves the ancient refining technique. Just entering and exiting the Thunder Palace will consume one's lifespan. How can it be used by ordinary people? Didn't your husband already mention this matter before?" Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. After all, he had already mentioned this matter when he first came in. He didn't understand why Shui would bring it up again. He thought that Shui didn't believe him, so he roughly explained what he encountered in Misty Cloud Sect. Hearing that using a magic tool would also consume one's lifespan, Shui completely extinguished her thoughts and looked at the hall with some regret. "Haha, it doesn't matter." "Shui," Xiaohua said with a smile, "If you want to go in, or if you want Ling Feiyun to go in, just tell your husband." "You don't understand." Shui couldn't help but retort. However, she immediately forced a smile and said, I understand. I just thought of my uncle and brother, and wanted to leave something for them. In, your husband understands. Xiaohua nodded. If there are any good things in the future, we will remember Misty Mountain. Okay, Shui was somewhat dispirited. She slightly nodded and said a few words to Xiaohua before flying out of the Thunder Palace. Shui originally thought that Xiaohua would be in seclusion for a few days. However, she didn't expect that in just half a day, Xiaohua would come out and call Shui to the underground Thunder Palace. He bitterly smiled and pointed to the last stone wall. Wife, this thunder refining technique is not complete. It only has the first half. If your husband's guess is correct, the second half should be in Luofeng Mountain. Haha, even if it's Luofeng Mountain. So what? Luofeng Mountain and my Misty Mountain are of the same origin. Shui smiled. Since last time Xiaohua acted ruthlessly, that place has already become Misty Mountain's territory. We can go there at any time. The time to ask for leave. Xiaohua hesitated. I haven't looked at the jade slip yet. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm afraid it won't be enough, right? -11. Chapter 30:27. Hehe, now that the sect is in turmoil, you are definitely the focus of attention. If you don't go back, the masters of the Great Thunder Hall will be happy. Shui says smilingly. If you go back, it will instead be troublesome. But Xiaohua doesn't think so, shaking his head slightly. I am avoiding trouble, but what about the disciples of my 10,000 Thunder Valley? Eldest apprentice brother has always been weak, not good at fighting with others. Although junior apprentice brother Cui is good at socializing, unfortunately his mana is limited. Master is still in seclusion. We can't let Master's wife show herself in public, right? Hearing Xiaohua's responsible words, Shui smiled with gratification and said, let me think about it. Previously, I felt that there should be something in the Thunder Palace that I just found out about. It's just that the inside is too chaotic, and I'll leave it to you. Xiaohua is overjoyed, walking to the 9 stone walls and examining them bit by bit. He doesn't have much time. It's best if he memorizes these lightning refining methods. After another half a day, he hears Shui's pleasantly surprised voice. Darling Xiao, quick, quick. I remember. It's here. Xiaohua hastily flies to where Shui is standing. It's a stone wall that's exactly the same as the other 4. Shui points and says with a smile, I know that there is a passage here that can lead directly to the Lightning Palace of Flying Phoenix Ridge, but I don't know how to open the passage. Hehe, didn't I say so? Misty Mountain and Flying Phoenix Ridge are of the same origin. The underground palace must also be connected. Xiaohua chuckles, his whole body flickering with green light. Dots of green seal text appear, rushing towards the stone wall. When the green light on the stone wall flourishes, another thumb-sized green jumps out from the green light. This green seems to expand with the wind, becoming the size of a bowl in an instant. Oh, what kind of seal text is this? Xiaohua can clearly see that this bowl-sized green light is a seal text that he has never seen before. But before he can take a closer look, that seal text suddenly disintegrates, turning into 36 different seal text. These seal text emits a strange woo-woo sound, simultaneously starting to rotate. As the 36 green seal characters spun, a vortex appeared behind them. The vortex grew bigger and deeper, and in the time it took to brew a cup of tea, it formed a deep tunnel that was dozens of feet tall. Wonderful, Xiaohua sighed. He knew that the green seal script was a passageway that could even be transported. Unfortunately, he could only look at it and couldn't really touch it. Let's go. I'll go and see if that's the Flying Phoenix Ridge. Xiaohua looked at the already stabilized passage. The 4 walls of the passage were overflowing with green light, and countless tiny green seal characters were flickering within the green light. He smiled and pulled Shui's hand and flew into the passage. The passage didn't look too long. Xiaohua and Shui only walked for a while before reaching the other end of the passage. As Xiaohua had expected, this place was also a huge space, just like the Thunder Palace. At a glance, Xiaohua saw the word lightning behind the huge stone chair, as well as the 9 stone walls opposite the huge stone chair. Is this the Lightning Palace? Is it under the palace of the Flying Phoenix Ridge? Shui looked at this space in disbelief. and then looked at the top of the space and said curiously, "The flying phoenix ridge is very far from the misty mountain. Even if it's a teleportation formation, it needs to be under the pressure of teleportation. I've just walked such a short distance with my husband. The talismans of soul cultivators are not something you can imagine." Xiaohua naturally knew about the magic of the Million Ming Mountains, but he felt a little awkward when he had to really explain it. After all, he was a disciple of the Tao sect. "In my heart, I've always thought that the Million Ming Mountain soul cultivators were uncivilized people, but I didn't expect." Shui was suddenly stunned. No matter if it was the Thunder Palace of the Misty Mountain or the Lightning Palace of the Flying Phoenix Ridge, they all seemed to be related to soul cultivators. If that was the case, wasn't her origin related to the Million Ming Mountains? Xiaohua naturally knew what Shui was thinking. Looking at Shui's pale face, he smiled and said, "The Million Ming Mountains is definitely not something you can imagine. If there's a chance in the future, I'll take you to see it. I'll definitely change your mind." Hee. Out of Xiaohua's expectation, Shui returned to normal in an instant. She smiled and said, "I know. In the future, I'll follow my husband to the Ming Mountains to have a look." But then, Shui hurriedly urged Xiaohua, "As for now, why don't my husband hurry up and comprehend these techniques?" "Okay." Xiaohua nodded. However, he was not in a hurry to practice the green seal characters. Instead, he first walked to the 9 stone walls and confirmed that the engravings on them were the latter half of the lightning refining technique. Only then did he feel relieved and walked to the side of the stone chair. He released his soul strands and touched the huge lightning character. Sure enough, this lightning was the same as the lightning in the Thunder Palace. It was also a talisman made up of 36 green seal characters, the lightning flashing technique. In an instant, whether it was Huan Qi Sky, Qing Shun Sky, or Ming Ruo Sky, all of them were filled with lightning and thunder. Shui stood in the distance and looked at Xiaohua's body that was surrounded by lightning. That roar that came from the ancient times was faintly discernible in the lightning. This roar could not be heard, but Shui could clearly feel it in her heart. In addition to the majestic sound of thunder in the Thunder Palace, Shui could almost see Xiaohua using this lightning, flashing, thunder-rolling talisman, divine ability. A thin and tall immortal flying high in the sky. His left palm roared with thunder, and his right hand controlled lightning. He moved through the clouds and created rain. He showed grace to the world, and his might shook the small fry. Wasn't this Taoist Xiao, who was worshipped by billions of people? Will I be able to see that day? Shui's nose turned sour, and tears unconsciously gushed out from her eyes. She hastily turned around and forcefully endured it. She looked at the 9 stone walls as if she was hiding something. Xiaohua did not know that Shui had lost control of her emotions. He was currently infatuated with the witchcraft incantation of the lightning flashing technique. From this witchcraft incantation, a feeling of controlling the world was born in his heart. A desire to trample all living things under his feet involuntarily grew. Roar, Xiaohua roared loudly. The thunder-rolling talisman that he had just learned was also released from his soul strands. For a moment, the lightning flashing and thunder rolling in the mysterious dark clouds once again appeared in the entire lightning palace. Another few days passed. After comprehending the profound mysteries of the lightning flashing technique, Xiaohua did not stop to rest. It was as if practicing the incantation would make him even more energetic, as if he would not be tired at all. Soon after, he walked to the 9 stone walls and carefully examined the second half of the lightning refining technique. Shui was originally worried, but when she saw Xiaohua's concentrated appearance, she knew that his cultivation was deeper than hers. In the field of refining, he was even more of an expert. If she said anything, she would only disturb Xiaohua. Thus, Shui sat there like a statue, like a still stone. Her gaze deeply stared at Xiaohua. She looked at his frown, looked at his joy, looked at his realization, and looked at his sigh. That expression of love seemed to have been here since the beginning of the world. Even if the world came to an end, this attachment would not fade. After comprehending a part, Xiaohua was suddenly startled. He turned his head to look at Shui and asked curiously, "Why do you keep staring at me?" Because this concubine likes you, loves you, and wants to imprint your every move into this concubine's heart. Shue Shue sweetly smiled and said with a slightly overbearing tone. Xiaohua smiled. Shue Shue had not revealed such an unreasonable expression for a long time. These words seemed to make him think of the situation when he first met Shue Shue in Yinyuan City. AI, time really flies. Moreover, the fate of this world is truly wonderful. Xiaohua sighed with emotion and once again immersed himself in comprehending. But right at this moment, Shue Shue sighed and said, Darling Xiao, how long will it take for you to comprehend this lightning refining technique? Right now, I'm afraid there isn't enough time. If you want to return to the sect before the day of leave. This, Xiaohua smiled bitterly. This is an ancient artifact refining technique. Although this husband already has some understanding of the Tao of artifact refining, if I want to comprehend this lightning refining technique, it won't be easy. As for the time, this husband can't say. AI, husband, you're still too kind. Shue Shue sighed. If it was another cultivator, I'm afraid they would have used their divine ability long ago. Not only would they have destroyed the 2 green seal characters, but they would also have taken away the 18 stone walls, right? Hee hee. Xiaohua scratched his head and said embarrassedly, To tell my wife the truth, this husband really did not think about this. This husband has always felt that this is the grace of the ancestors and does not belong to this husband. This husband is already satisfied to be able to take a peek at its wonders. How could I dare to destroy this treasure? Of course, this is my wife's inheritance, so this husband can't destroy it. Husband has already learned the 2 talismans. There's no need to say anything more. Shue Shue stood up and said, Since husband is unable to comprehend this lightning refining technique in a short time, then this wife will make the decision. You can take this lightning refining technique away. After you comprehend it, you can return it to this wife, okay? This, Xiaohua rubbed his hands. Previously, he wanted to record it in a jade slip, but this lightning refining technique was an ancient language. There were some meanings that he did not know and still needed to ponder over. If there was a mistake in the record, wouldn't he regret it for the rest of his life? However, Shue Shue's suggestion made Xiaohua, who had always pursued perfection, hesitate. He could secretly learn it, but he would not forcefully snatch it, let alone destroy it. This husband will still. Darling Xiao. Shue Shue shook her head. Didn't this wife already say it? You don't have much time. Without you, the myriad Thunder Valley might not be able to withstand the pressure of the other Thunder Palaces. Moreover, this wife needs to go into seclusion. You still need to go into seclusion? Xiaohua said curiously. Yes, didn't this wife tell you in the myriad Thunder Valley? Shue Shue forced a smile. After this wife builds her foundation, she still needs to go into seclusion again. However, husband, this wife can guarantee that this will be the last time I go into seclusion. Oh, didn't you say? Xiaohua sat up to hear, then waved his hand and said, Forget it. This husband thought that what you said in the myriad Thunder Valley was to make this husband take a leave of absence and hide. Seeing Xiaohua's displeasure, Shue Shue said with a smile, This wife going into seclusion is a small matter. The safety of the myriad Thunder Valley is a big matter. Letting Marshal Uncle Zhua face the Thunder Palace alone, I'm afraid it's not good, right? -11. Chapter 30:28. And I know, this is something I caused, so I have to take responsibility for it. Xiaohua narrowed his eyes. Human nature is to bully the weak and fear the strong. It's also the easiest to get jealous. I'm afraid that I performed too well in the Dao sword battle and allowed the myriad Thunder Valley to obtain too much. Their eyes are red. As he spoke, Xiaohua slapped his hand. The nascent soul's hand rushed out of his forehead and grabbed the stone wall. With a loud rumble, countless lightning flashed and thunder rolled from the stone wall, trying to shatter the nascent soul's hand. Woo! The green light around Xiaohua flickered. The same lightning flashed and thunder rolled under the nascent soul's hand. It was the counterattack that hit the stone wall. The lightning flash and thunder roll technique was very strange. No matter if it was lightning or lightning, it was born out of thin air. There was no need for dark clouds to accompany it. Moreover, the size of the lightning was at will. Although Xiao Hua was a beginner, he could barely control the lightning to not hit the words on the stone wall. As soon as Xiao Hua's lightning flash and thunder roll came out, the lightning and thunder on the stone wall gradually disappeared and finally disappeared. Rise! Xiao Hua roared. The entire lightning flash palace shook. The 10 zhang tall stone wall was pulled out from the ground by Xiao Hua. After Xiao Hua collected the 9 stone walls, he brought Xue Xue back to the Thunder Roll Palace. Xue Xue blinked her eyes and said with a smile, "Husband, can you bring me to take a look? I still don't believe that this is the Flying Phoenix mountain range." Xiao Hua was speechless. He really didn't understand why the female cultivator was so curious. However, after Xue Xue pointed out the exit, he still brought Xue Xue into the green seal words that gushed out like a fountain. Half a day later, Xiao Hua and Xue Xue flew out of the Fog Mountains formation. When they waved goodbye to Ling Jingyi and Ling Feiyun, Xue Xue still didn't dare to believe it. She said, "Darling Xiao, that's only 100 zhang long passage. It actually leads to the Flying Phoenix mountain range? Is this soul cultivator's witchcraft so magical? My Dao sect has a teleportation formation, so soul cultivators naturally have. Oh, I really don't know the name of this witchcraft. There's nothing strange about it." Xiao Hua smiled and pointed at Xue Xue's head. "When you absorb the soul cultivator's inheritance, you'll naturally know how powerful they are." But speaking up to here, Xiao Hua pinched his chin with his hand and shook his head. "However, there is still one thing that your husband doesn't understand." "Oh, what's wrong?" Xue Xue was curious. "Your soul imprint technique should belong to the Dao sect. This artifact should also belong to the Dao sect. Why did the soul imprint transform into something similar to the green seal text?" Xiao Hua explained, "Furthermore, with my eyes, I don't think this is a soul cultivator's witchcraft. Furthermore, that sound." At this point, Xiao Hua frowned slightly. That was because the voice and the black shadow were very strange. Although the black shadow resembled a lightning beast, it was also different. That voice was even more subtle. In fact, Xiao Hua found it somewhat familiar. It was actually somewhat similar to the voice Xiao Hua heard when he shattered the nether passage mirror. However, one was a voice, while the other was a beast's cry. Xiao Hua couldn't be sure. "What's wrong with your voice?" Xue Xue didn't understand what Xiao Hua was thinking and asked. "Alas, there are too many secrets in this world." Xiao Hua was helpless. He also didn't know how to explain. He simply explained what he encountered in the Hutu stronghold and spread out his hands. "I'm afraid you will only know the truth after you comprehend this inheritance, right?" Xue Xue's face listened for a long time. Her small face was deathly pale at first, but then it slowly became rosy. Her eyes were somewhat blurred. Holding Xiao Hua's hand was unexpectedly somewhat moist. She even asked in a low voice, "Xiao Hua, is there really a netherworld in this world? The netherworld sea you saw was really a sea of undead?" It should be true. Xiao Hua also didn't know. After all, it was the incarnation of the great god that the Hutu stronghold worships. Moreover, your husband has heard of a true great god's avatar. Then, if this concubine falls into the netherworld, will husband look for this concubine? Xue Xue faintly asked. However, without waiting for Xiao Hua to speak, Xue Xue sweetly smiled and said, "Hee, this concubine is speaking nonsense. Husband, don't think too much. Even if such a day really comes, this concubine will definitely not put husband in danger. Think about it, the netherworld is full of death. How can cultivators like us go in? Not to mention the Mahayana stage, even immortals wouldn't dare to rashly enter, right? This concubine still hopes that husband can live well, become famous in Xiaoyu continent, and give birth to 8 or 10 children with big sister Hongxia." "Hee, my wife, what nonsense are you talking about?" Xiao Hua rejoiced that Xue Xue didn't force him to state his position. The dangers of the netherworld were really as Xue Xue said. Only the almighty of the immortal world could enter, right? He was just a small cultivator of the mortal world. Not to mention that he was only at the Jindan stage. Even if he passed the tribulation, talking about the netherworld was purely a dream. He smiled and scratched Xue Xue's nose. 8 or 10 children is what you want, right? Does my wife want to dual cultivate with this husband? Hee. Shue Shue pursed her lips and smiled. You already did good things with big sister Hongxia. Why can't this concubine think about it? Okay, Xiao Hua's heart swayed. He looked left and right, then called out, then, don't. Shue Shue's face turned red, and she hurriedly said, this concubine still needs to go into seclusion. When I come out, this concubine will send a message. You can ask Marshal Uncle Zhua to go to my Sunlei palace to propose marriage. At that time, Shue Shue was abnormally shy, and she didn't say anything else. Okay. Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, how long will you be in seclusion this time? It won't be more than 2 years. Shue Shue nodded with certainty. Hee. Xiao Hua smiled. That's right. The great battle of Daoan's sword was probably going to have a clear ending. His nameless identity was probably going to be exposed. 2 years later, when Shue Shue comes out of seclusion, wouldn't he be able to give her a pleasant surprise? Husband, your smile is so lascivious. Did you think of big sister Hongxia again? After saying that, Shue Shue flew away like a wisp of smoke. This female cultivator. Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and touched his nose, saying in a low voice, she seems to be far less pure than us male cultivators, think. While chatting and laughing along the way, Xiao Hua and Shue Shue returned to the Imperial Thunder Sect. Before they landed on Sky Thunder Peak, they were discovered by some disciples on duty. But this time, the attitude of the disciples on duty was different. Other than the necessary respect and some worship that came from the bottom of their hearts, there were also some strange expressions. Xiao Hua and Shue Shue naturally noticed it very easily, but the two of them didn't pursue it. After Xiao Hua sent Shue Shue back to Sunlei Palace, he turned around and hurriedly flew to Myriad Thunder Valley. Xiao Hua understood that something major must have happened in Myriad Thunder Valley. Otherwise, the disciples on duty wouldn't be so strange. Watching Xiao Hua's thin and tall figure fly away, Shue Shue quietly stood in midair and stared at him for a long time. Her tears flowed down her cheeks. Husband, Shue Shue murmured, this parting is like being separated by life and death. When I look back, I'll remember all the love in my heart. No matter what cultivation level, no matter what realm, it can't compare to this concubine lying quietly by your side. If this concubine had a choice, this concubine would choose not to fall in love with you. If this concubine had any regrets, this concubine would regret meeting you. But the heavens gave this concubine this opportunity, letting this concubine fall in love with you, letting this concubine witness the growth of a hero. The heavens won't give this concubine the chance to choose or regret, so this concubine will never regret, nor will there be any other choice. Xiao Hua, do you know? This concubine can't bear to leave you. But, at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice sounded. Junior sister Shue, you're back? Xiao Hua is also back? Shue Shue wiped her tears and sniffed. Her entire face changed into a smile. She turned her head and smiled. So it's senior sister Shue. Xiao Hua just returned to Myriad Thunder Valley. Why did he come back now? Why didn't he stay outside for a few more days? Shue Shu said anxiously. Quick, junior sister Shue, quickly send a message. Tell him not to rush back to Myriad Thunder Valley. It's fine, senior sister Shue. Shue Shue shook her head and said, no matter what happens, this little sister thinks that Xiao Hua can handle it. Then, I'll accompany you to Myriad Thunder Valley. Shue Shu hesitated and said anxiously, right now, Xiao Hua needs your support. No need. Shue Shue shook her head. This little sister still needs to go into seclusion. You. Shue Shu almost wanted to stomp her feet. At this time, why are you still in seclusion? Isn't Xiao Hua's matter more important than seclusion? If senior sister Shue wants to go, then go by yourself. Shue Shue said indifferently. This little sister still has more important things to do. Excuse me. Saying that, Shue Shue turned and flew into Sunlei Palace. Junior sister. Shue Shu was a little embarrassed. She could have gone to Myriad Thunder Valley, but now that Shue Shue said that, how could she go? Looking at Shue Shue's expression, it was obvious that she was on guard against her. Having a good impression of him makes him an enemy? Shue Shu smiled bitterly. I didn't do anything wrong either. but looking at Shue's disappearing figure in the direction of Myriad Thunder Valley, Shu finally turned back, putting aside Xiao Hua's flight to Myriad Thunder Valley and Shue's inexplicable seclusion again. In Twilight Tong City, in the bustling meeting hall that was like a bird's nest, many Taoist sect cultivators' faces were pale as if they had lost their parents. No one knew if it was because of the fall of Sky Patrol City or because of the loss of their spirit stones. Some of them were roaring in excitement, but no one knew if it was because their relatives and old friends had fallen into the enemy's hands or because they felt bad about the Taoist sect's defeat. Some of them were biting their lips and whispering to their friends beside them. No one knew if they were concerned about the Taoist sect disciples who had fallen into Sky Patrol City or discussing the outcome of the Taoist Sword Great War. In short, almost all the cultivators gathered in front of the door of the first mystery of the Taoist Sword Great War, because perhaps in the next moment, the answer to the biggest mystery at the beginning of the Taoist Sword Great War would be revealed. Although everyone had the same thought in their hearts, they knew that the Taoist sect, which had never lost in the Taoist Sword Great War for tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of years, was really going to be defeated this time. But before the news came, everyone always had a trace of luck in their hearts. Perhaps, just like the Sword Tomb Great War, at the last moment, a mysterious John Doe would turn the situation around. -11.